Morning, everybody. It's 7 o'clock coming up on the programme for you. Israel allows Palestinians to return to northern Gaza in a deal that will see 6 hostages freed this week.
Plus, a warm and personable chat. Sir Keir Starmer becomes the first European leader to speak to Donald Trump since his inauguration.
And could a poo-powered car be the future of motor racing? We'll speak to the engineers behind it.
Yep, he really did just say that. It's Monday, the 27th of January. Israel allows nearly 500,000 Palestinians to return to northern Gaza for the first time in more than a year.
Issues over the prisoner hostage exchange that emerged over this weekend have now been resolved. The ceasefire is still holding, and 6 hostages will be released in the coming week.
Sky News reports from the front line where Ukrainian special forces are confronting North Korean troops. The King will become the first British monarch to visit Auschwitz today, 80 years on from its liberation. Keir Starmer and Donald Trump agree to meet soon, setting the path for a state visit by the US president. And another named storm hits the UK, bringing more gale force winds, heavy rain and snow. Morning, everybody. Israel is allowing nearly 500,000 Palestinians to return to northern Gaza for the first time in more than a year. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle joining us now from Jerusalem. That's already started, has it? Alistair, good morning.
Good morning. So over the weekend, we saw the second hostage prisoner exchange. But one Israeli hostage, Arbel Yehud, was not one of those 4 released by Hamas over the weekend. And Israel said that that was a violation of the ceasefire agreement because she should have been released. As a result, Israel prevented Gazans from being able to return to the north of Gaza as they should have been allowed to do on Sunday had all been running smoothly. Those issues have now been resolved by the mediators. Hamas have said that Arbel Yehud is still alive and she'll be released in the coming days, along with another IDF female soldier, Agam Berger, and a third hostage. There will then be a second release of hostages later this week, on Saturday, we understand. As a result, the Israeli forces have now withdrawn from parts of what's called the Netzarim corridor, which cuts north and south Gaza off from one another. And we can see the pictures here from Wadi Gaza in that area of tens and tens of thousands of people starting to return home to the north. Many of them been displaced many times over. They've been living in tented camps in the Mawasi humanitarian zone in dreadful conditions, but they are now finally able to return back to the north, to Gaza City and other towns in the north of the Strip. What they will find there, though, is an area that has been almost entirely destroyed, but they will be able to go to where their homes are or where their homes were and start to think about the potential of rebuilding their lives. But, you know, rebuilding Gaza is a long way off still. This ceasefire remains fragile. There's no guarantee it will move from the first phase into a next stage. And Hamas, interestingly, today, a senior Hamas Politburo official has told a Saudi media outlet that Hamas would consider not being in control of Gaza going forward in the future. They would support perhaps an administration made up of non-political figures, and they would be willing to discuss that with the United States and specifically with President Trump. And I think that is interesting for many reasons, because obviously Hamas saying that they are willing to accept the idea that they wouldn't be part of the governance of the future of Gaza is significant. But also I think it is a message to Donald Trump after his comments over the last couple of days where he said that Egypt and Jordan should start taking Palestinians from Gaza, and effectively Gaza should be cleared out because it is a mess at the moment. Palestinians, including Hamas, have reacted strongly to that suggestion.
Yeah, and as far as President Trump is concerned, he was suggesting, according to my morning papers, that Palestinians should go to Egypt or Jordan.
He had a call with the King of Jordan a couple of days ago. He said the relationship between the two men is very good. He referenced the fact that there are many Palestinians who live in Jordan. I mean, almost 50% of the Jordanian population has Palestinian heritage, but that is a very, very different matter. They have been living there for many decades, for the most part. But what Trump was saying is that many, if not all, of the roughly 2 million people in Gaza should be sent to Egypt across the border or to Jordan, because Gaza is a complete mess and needs to be rebuilt. But of course, Palestinians living in Gaza will say, if we leave Gaza, the chances are we'll never be allowed to return. Israel would never allow us to return. So they've rejected that completely out of hand. It's been welcomed by many of the far right here in Israel as a sensible suggestion. Whether or not it's a workable suggestion or not, or a realistic suggestion, I have my doubts, particularly as you see these pictures and people just desperate to return back to what is left of their homes in the north.
OK, Alistair Van High, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Of course, monitoring that story throughout the course of the day for you here on Sky News, remembering more hostages being released later on this week. Mari's back. It's good to see you back.
It's good to see you.
I hope you had a lovely time.
I did, thank you.
So, talk to me about Keir Starmer and Donald Trump sitting in a tree. Where are we going with this bromance?
I know, right? So, interestingly, yesterday, Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, they had this phone call. And the readout that came out was really quite positive, quite warm, from both the White House and from Downing Street. So Trump offered his condolences to start with to Keir Starmer for the loss of his brother over the Christmas period. And then Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he paid tribute to Donald Trump's allowing or success, as it were, of securing a ceasefire deal in the Middle East. I know you were just speaking about that with Ali Bunkel there. And then what was really interesting, they started to talk about trade. And Keir Starmer, in the readout, said that he said how we are deregulating to boost growth. Now, deregulation is something that would be music to Donald Trump's ears, realistically. We know that's the kind of political family, as it were, he belongs to. But it's not the kind of thing that's a natural space for the Labour Party or for a left-wing party to be talking about lots of deregulation all the time. So that was really, really fascinating to see. They also talked about, warm ties and a close relationship. They agreed to meet soon. We don't know when that will be exactly. We don't know when or where that will be. Could it be Donald Trump, for instance, coming on a state visit? Those questions are still bubbling up in terms of how that will work. And it will be interesting to see who and what Donald Trump does first, now that he has had his inauguration. But what was also really interesting was the White House added a little line to their readout that we didn't have in our readout, which was saying, they discussed how both countries can promote for fair and bilateral economic relationship. Now, that was a little bit more corporate, a little bit more cold, let's say, than the tone in the Downing Street readout. And the question will be questions from the government around tariffs and trade and all those kinds of things, and also whether Donald Trump is going to accept Keir Starmer's choice of ambassador as well. So a few kind of nervousness worries, let's say, from Downing Street, but so far it sounds like they'll be quite happy with that readout.
So we might see him back again before too long. For now, thank you. Thanks very much. Now, after a weekend of chaos that saw 2 people killed, a hospital lose power and travel disrupted right across the country, another named storm is bringing more wild winds for us. This is what it looked like over the weekend. As I said, 2 people sadly lost their lives. One when a tree fell on their vehicle, another when a tree tumbled onto a house. Rachel's here with us. Tell us more about the storm.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that we've got more driving, rain, ferocious winds and potential flooding as well in place, Kay. This is after another low-pressure system coming right off the back of Storm Eowyn, as you were saying there. This one's Storm Herminia, named by Spanish meteorologists because that's where the worst of the winds and the rain has been, but it's still been making its presence known here, as you'll be able to see on that map. Yellow weather warnings covering a huge swathe of the south of England, large parts of Wales as well. Parts of Devon yesterday, 30 54 millimetres of rain and winds of up to 80 miles an hour, both in places like South Devon and also in North Wales. And we're also seeing flooding, 40 flood warnings in place across this part of the UK. And this is landing on, of course, already saturated ground after the aftermath of the storm over the weekend, with parts of Scotland and Ireland still struggling to pick up from the ramifications of that storm. You already mentioned, of course, sadly, 2 young men died. And we know homes in Northern Ireland still were without power on Sunday evening, and also in Scotland as well. While a huge amount of work had been done to clear the rail lines, there were still delays expected through into the start of Monday morning this morning.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed, Rachel. Thank you. The King will become the first British monarch to visit Auschwitz today, 80 years on from its liberation. 6 million Jews were systematically murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. Siobhan Robbins reports.
Simon wasn't meant to survive. As a child, Nazis sent him to die. He remembers the day evil came to his door and took him, his mother and sister away.
The doorbell rang and all 3 of us froze. The front door opened and 2 men entered shouting, "Gestapo, papers." My mother got up, as white as a sheet, and handed over her ID card, her passport. The Nazi took a look at it and appeared satisfied. Yes, this is the Granovsky family. You have been denounced.
Simon was just 11 when he was arrested with his mother Shanna and sister Ita in Belgium. Their crime, being Jewish. Their punishment, execution at Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland. They'd been packed with more than 1,000 others on a Nazi death train heading towards this hell, when a resistance attack gave Simon a chance to escape.
I jumped from the train and I heard the soldiers running in my direction, firing gunshots and shouting. I jumped from the train because I obeyed my mother. If she had told me to stay with her, then I'd never have left her side. And I would have died with her in the gas chamber.
In the chaos, Simon says he fled into the woods and kept running until a local family gave him refuge. 3 days later, his mother was dead. She and Simon's sister were among more than 1 million people murdered at Auschwitz. Practiced and precise extermination, many starved, shot, gassed, or worked to death. All over the world, Auschwitz has become a symbol of terror, genocide, and the Holocaust, the darkest acts of humanity that should never be repeated. As survivors prepare to return here for the 80th anniversary of the camp's liberation, Simon's making his own pilgrimage to Auschwitz, to the place he calls the Factory of Death, where his sister and mother now rest. A place where he tells young people about the crimes of the past to prevent a repeat in the present.
I want to inform the young people of the barbarity of yesterday for defend our democracy of today.
Simon, a witness to the greatest crime in history, issuing a warning in divided times. Auschwitz is a lasting reminder of humanity at its most inhumane. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Auschwitz.
Siobhan joining us live now. What's the plan later on today, Siobhan? Good morning.
Good morning, Kay. Well, this morning, around 50 of the Auschwitz survivors are expected, first of all, to visit Auschwitz main camp. And there they're going to go to the death wall, which is, of course, that horrendous wall where many prisoners were shot by the Nazis. There they'll lay wreaths. And then later this afternoon, there's going to be a ceremony marking the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And that, as always, will be focused on survivors. And again, they'll be giving speeches, they'll be talking about their memories, but also their hopes for the future. And that's going to be attended by dignitaries from around the world, including King Charles. He'll be representing the UK, the first British monarch to visit Auschwitz. Then there'll also be other dignitaries, including Emmanuel Macron from France, Olaf Scholz from Germany. But I think this year is particularly poignant because many of those survivors and the people that I've spoken to in the run-up to this anniversary are concerned about how long they're going to be here to tell their stories. And so they say this is a particularly important year at a time when they fear anti-Semitism is rising, that we remember what happened in the past to ensure it isn't repeated now.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed, Siobhan. Thank you. And please join us from 2 p.m. for a special programme on the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz. We'll bring you live coverage of the ceremony in Poland. Meantime, rest of today's news for you now. Here's Gareth.
Yes, good morning. Let's turn to some of the day's other stories for you. Rwandan-backed rebels have captured the city of Goma in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Congolese government says it amounts to a declaration of war, and the UN has described mass panic among the 2 million people living there. Swedish authorities have seized a ship suspected of sabotaging an underwater cable in the Baltic Sea. NATO has begun patrols in recent weeks to stop repeated attacks on underwater power and telecoms cables, some of which have been blamed on Russia, which Russia denies. The government is to introduce a deposit return scheme for plastic bottles and cans. They hope it will increase the amount of containers which are recycled to around 90%. Pharmacists are calling for tougher rules over the sale of online weight loss jabs. The National Pharmacy Association warns that online retailers are treating the drugs like grocery items at a checkout and says that weight loss jabs should only be available after face-to-face consultations.
Now, could football fans in England soon be able to enjoy a pint at their seat? Probably.
Well, they are testing to see if it is safe to do so, and the trials are underway in the Women's Championship with a few matches allowing booze in the stands while the match is on, and I've been to Birmingham City to take a look. Drinking in the stands, stopped in English football in 1985 to stop hooliganism. For now, only in the women's game again. Birmingham City part of trials in the Championship.
So many children here, though. Loads of people bring their children, so I don't think people would cause much trouble.
I don't think so, no.
No.
The only bitter taste, losing to promotion rivals Bristol City.
And it's a dream start for Bristol City. I think it's a stupid idea. I hate it.
You need to drown your sorrows.
I was going to say, yeah, we do.
We should have a lovely time and watch lovely football and enjoy each other's company and have a lovely drink while we're at it.
And it works in every other sector. Why shouldn't it work?
Just as it does in cricket, rugby and horse racing. But Scottish football is the most restrictive. Not a drop can be poured for most fans in stadiums. Top four. In Birmingham's other game yesterday at Aston Villa, not a drink in sight. But as usual in the Men's Premier League, they were flowing in the concourses away from sight of the pitch.
I think beers in the ground and watching the game is possibly, should be on the cards. The 80s is gone. 90s with the thugs, I think, has gone now.
But all football-related arrests last season were around men's games.
These fans are the pioneers, being able to drink inside football matches during the game for the first time in 4 decades. But the sense is, in men's football, the crowds are just too intense to avoid the chaos that could be caused by allowing boozing in the stands.
Last thing you want to do if you're not drinking is be soaked in beer when the beer goes up. So I don't think at a men's game I'd want it, to be honest.
And for Birmingham City's CEO, providing a different fan experience at women's matches could grow crowds and help players.
If they spend a bit more money, it just puts more money back into the women's game and we all benefit. And we will only know how big a first step it will be once we get through the trials, see the results.
Hoping to show it's safe to down pints in the stands again. For now, they're taking it sip by sip. Rob Harris, Sky News, Birmingham.
And is there much resistance?
Well, the police have flagged concerns, particularly thinking back to the Men's European Championship in Germany last summer, how fans could get soaked in beer. If you've got it in the air, you might fling it to celebrate a goal. And they say that creates a wider sort of safety issue as it causes quite a bit of mayhem. But in the women's game, where the trials are taking place, currently there's a lot less tribalism. For instance, fans from rival clubs can all sit together if they want, unlike in the men's game.
That's interesting. Vinay, thanks so much indeed. More online as well, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, let's talk about Donald Trump again, should we? He's reinforced his desire to take control of Greenland and claimed the Arctic island residents want to be part of the US. Joined now by former Danish Minister for Greenland, Tom Hoyem. Hi, Tom. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning.
Nice to see you.
The likelihood of this happening, do you think?
No, not at all. That's possible. Not possible.
Why do you say that?
There are many reasons for that. First of all, we have the same kingdom, Denmark and Greenland and the Faroe Islands, and we all want to continue in some cooperation, some kingdom cooperation. And the idea from Mr. Trump is 150 years old. In US, you discuss this issue from time to time. The first time back in 1867, that was when US bought Alaska from Russia. At that time, someone said, well, when we are buying Alaska, we should also buy Greenland. But the idea was dropped totally. Then it was discussed again in 1916, because in the 1916, that was the First World War. Denmark, we sold the Virgin Islands. I mean, today it's crazy, it's absurd to discuss selling, but that was how it happened at that time. We sold the Virgin Islands to President Wilson in the United States, and President Wilson had a debate against him because there were big feelings and big media in US saying, when we now buy the Virgin Islands, we would like also at the same time to buy Greenland. And Mr. Wilson was nearly as impolite as Mr. Trump, even when that's difficult, because he wrote to the Danish government, we, US, we have decided also to buy Greenland, but since Greenland is worthless, we will not change the price. The price for the Virgin Islands will be $25 million, and then we want to have Greenland also. But we had a very clever young Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Danish government. He wrote back, no, dear Mr. Wilson, we have decided we are not selling the Virgin Islands, or the price has changed. The price is the $25 million, and that you, President Wilson, on behalf of United States, write that Greenland is and will forever be Danish. And Wilson was not interested in the island, so he wrote, yes, forever Denmark, Greenland will be Danish. And then we Danes, we were running around in the world and asking people, please, here Mr. Wilson have signed it and you should accept it. And everybody accepted it without being very interested, with two exceptions. The one was Norway. Norway claimed to have a part of Greenland, and the other one was United Kingdom. United Kingdom had always, on behalf of Canada, been interested in Greenland, because the distance between Greenland and Canada is, on the smallest place, maybe 20 kilometers. So the United Kingdom said, no, we only accepted this if in the future you would like to sell Greenland, then we, United Kingdom, should actually have the right to buy it as the first. And you would say, well, that was 1916. Has that any value today? I do not know, because in the International Court of Den Haag in 1933, there was a court because at that time Norway had claimed to have the east part of Greenland, and the court in Den Haag ruled that claim out and said, no, the whole of Greenland is Danish. But of course, they were not dealing with the claim from the United Kingdom. So, I mean, we are in a crazy, absurd situation, but should there be any kind of trying to buy Greenland, which is absurd, then of course Greenland would say no, Denmark would say no, and Mr. Trump would have to discuss with Mr. Starmer. I understand he does that from time to time to say, oh, what about your first right? But that's all crazy. It's just history. What is important for us today is that you have in the last 150 years in US always have this two directions. The one is to isolate the whole of US from the world. That is what Mr. Trump is doing now. And from other periods, the United States is very involved in the world. And each time when they start to isolate themselves, they're looking at the borders, and then comes this debate. The biggest debate about buying Greenland was in 1940, and that was totally crazy. Can you imagine? I mean, you are a journalist. In April 1940, this issue was on the front page of all media in United States because Denmark has just been occupied by Germany. We heard this about Auschwitz and so on in your program a little earlier. We were occupied in April 1940, and the United States were again in the same situation as Mr. Trump now. Should we involve ourselves in this war or should we not? And in this
Fascinating
time,
stuff, Tom.
Yeah.
So sorry, Tom. We've run out of time, but absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you so much. I had no idea that Trump would have to check with Starmer first if he did want to buy Greenland. Maybe that's why they're so buddy-buddy at the moment. Who knows? It's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News Monday morning. Sky News reports from the front line where Ukrainian special forces are confronting North Korean troops. And there's more wild weather on the way. We'll get the latest from the Met Office. A racing revolution, speaking to the experts behind a new fuel source being used to power the next generation of motorsport.
When you cover big, tense protests, there's almost always a moment when the atmosphere changes. There's a different noise, and you start to smell tear gas in the air.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
When we spoke to the fishermen down in Cornwall, all the politics from Westminster was a million miles away. This was about their jobs, their livelihoods.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Coming up after a weekend of wild weather, another named storm is on the way. We'll bring you all of the details on that. Also want to show you what's happening in Gaza as we speak. Here we go. These are images of Palestinians being able to return home after more than a year away from their homeland. Tens of thousands of Palestinians, we're told, Gazans, are returning this morning. That started a little bit earlier.
Yes, it did. It was supposed to have happened previously, but there had been kind of issues over the hostage release on Saturday. Israel was expecting another woman to have been released. That then would have led to what we're seeing today. There was delays over that. Hamas has said she will be released later this week. So we've seen the Nazantim corridor, which divided the strip, be reopened. And you can see here just the huge numbers of people making that journey. I would say to return home, but we know that so many homes and properties have been damaged. They'll be returning to see what is left of their home. I feel it's more accurate.
We haven't heard from the British government as far as this is concerned, very vocal over the last 14 months or so. What we do know is that we've heard from President Trump,
yes,
and he suggested that Palestinians should be housed elsewhere rather than Gaza for now.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when we had that phone call between the Prime Minister and Trump yesterday, and the Prime Minister was kind of paying tribute to Trump's ability to secure the ceasefire in the Middle East, and then simultaneously those comments, as you say, Kay, about people in Gaza potentially being kind of rehoused temporarily or permanently in, Egypt, Jordan, for instance, potentially undermining some of that progress by, many people criticising those comments, saying he doesn't potentially have a deeper understanding of why people in Gaza don't want to leave Gaza, why they want to stay, why they believe that it's their home. And so there's a weird kind of juxtaposition where Trump is trying to show that he can use his kind of muscular diplomacy to get things done when it comes to these wars, but nonetheless then some of the words that come out of his mouth undermine that message sometimes.
Yeah, some people might suggest what he's suggesting is immoral and illegal, but there you go, that's for others to decide. What else have we got?
Well, that is one of our top stories this morning. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are being allowed home to northern Gaza after Israel and Hamas agreed on the release of more hostages and prisoners as part of the ceasefire deal. Keir Starmer has become the first European leader to speak with Donald Trump since his inauguration. The 45-minute conversation was described as warm and personable, and they agreed to meet soon. Sky News has gained rare access to Ukrainian special forces and heard how North Korean troops fighting on behalf of Russia in the war are suffering heavy losses. Events are due to take place today, marking 80 years since the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp in Nazi-occupied Poland.
Rebel forces backed by Rwanda claim to have captured Congo's largest city of Goma. The UN has described mass panic in the city, while Congo's government says it's a declaration of war by the rebels. Live now to the city of Goma. And our Africa correspondent, Yusra Al-Baghir, is standing by. Hi, Yusra, what's it like where you are? Good morning.
Okay, it's extremely volatile. We've been hearing gunfire through the night, and just behind me is Mount Goma, where we've been told credibly that around 350 Congolese special forces are fighting against Rwandan-backed M23 rebels as we speak. It's been going on throughout the night. There have also been skirmishes around town, just kind of east to where we are in our hotel, close to the border. There's more gunfire coming in. We're also seeing people gathered around a Congolese army vehicle, trying to evacuate, trying to move, unable to. We've been told to stay in place, as well as UN staff, humanitarian staff across the city told to stay put. As M23 continues their capture of the city of Goma, things moved extremely quickly last night. We went from a deadline of 3 a.m. being told by M23 that they're going to capture the city, to them capturing the city at 10:30 p.m. local time. The UN troops, the peacekeeping troops, pulled in very early in the day yesterday, and they're no longer a target by M23, and their bases, the UNESCO peacekeeping mission bases, are now being a place where mercenaries are surrendering. We were told by a source in UNESCO that around 400 Romanian mercenaries went to their camps, laid down their arms and surrendered after being told by M23 rebels that they would burn them alive. It's extremely volatile here, but generally there was civil unrest, still a tentative calm, but there was civil unrest around the town. We've been told that the airport has been looted. We've been seeing videos of looting around Goma. And there is a sense from civilians here, a hope that M23 won't harm them, that this will be a peaceful takeover. But as the skirmishes continue, it's uncertain whether the Congolese army will hold on to Goma. But as it stands now, the city is effectively captured by M23.
OK, for now. Thank you, Yusra. North Korean troops appear to have temporarily pulled back from the front line in Russia after suffering heavy losses in their first clashes with Ukrainian soldiers. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes reports from a secret base in northeastern Ukraine and a warning. This report contains distressing images.
Control.
Ukrainian special forces move in on a unit of North Koreans that's just been hit by drones and artillery. They take no chances. The soldiers say Kim Jong-un's men have been known to blow themselves up with grenades on the battlefield rather than be captured alive.
Honestly, I didn't feel any pity for them. These people came from the other side of the world to fight against us on behalf of the enemy.
Sky News spoke exclusively to a commando who was on the operation inside the Russian region of Kursk. He says their task was to gather evidence to prove North Korean forces are fighting in the war, something neither Pyongyang nor Moscow have officially confirmed.
We are cutting hair for DNA testing. We take a sample from under the lip with a cotton swab. And of course we take tags that might indicate their presence, documents, military ID cards.
The ID cards are Russian, seemingly a clumsy attempt to mask identities. Evidence too, though, of real lives and loved ones back home. The commander of the Special Forces unit said the first time his men spotted North Koreans was on the 15th of December.
Unlike the Russians, who previously operated in smaller groups, we were now seeing groups of 20, 40 or even 60 men moving with remarkable speed. We began coordinating artillery strikes. What was unusual in this case was that they didn't retreat.
He shows us what he says is footage of dozens of North Korean soldiers killed fighting to help Moscow retake a chunk of Kursk that was captured by Ukraine last year. Kyiv says some 4,000 out of 11,000 North Koreans deployed to Russia have so far been killed or injured. We join a mortar team on Ukraine's side of the border with Kursk. They say attacks in this direction are intensifying, even as Moscow and Pyongyang focus on pushing Ukrainian troops off Russian land. Fire, he shouts. The soldiers are aiming for targets inside Russia.
They've just fired their mortars towards the Russian positions. We've been told there's a drone overhead, so we're having to get back to cover.
With Ukraine now pitched against two of the world's largest armies, it's a grueling fight.
The biggest danger? Mortars, shelling or FPV drones, and sometimes sabotage and reconnaissance groups.
The battle for Kursk could be about to become even harder, especially if the North Koreans learn lessons from their first clashes.
Right now, for about 2 weeks, there have been no North Koreans at all. Either they are analyzing their mistakes or tending to their wounds, or maybe they are waiting for reinforcements. There is talks that Kim Jong-un is sending more North Koreans here.
And what do you think?
I think they will return soon.
Deborah joining us now from the southern port city of Odessa. Hello to you, Deborah. Good morning. Amazing report from you. There, very tense time continuing on the front line. What happens next?
Yes, I mean, it's just remarkable detail, wasn't it, about these secretive North Korean troops. The soldiers that we spoke to, not just those two in the report, but we've been speaking to other Ukrainian troops as well who've also been fighting against these North Koreans. They describe them as being brainwashed, as being ready to die. Those special forces soldiers that we spoke to said the North Koreans they encountered appeared very well equipped with really a lot of new armour, new uniform. They said that they had like strong teeth, they were clean shaven, their hairs looked very short, well cut, as if they were very disciplined. But then there was also these details about how they were operating, moving in these large groups, like something out of World War II, one soldier told me. And also they weren't being backed up with heavy armour on their own side or even on the Russian side, instead moving on foot, exposing them obviously to artillery and drone fire. And then even transporting ammunition and supplies with golf carts, we were told. I think it's really interesting what that commander said at the end, though, about how he'd seen that the North Koreans had pulled back to sort of learn lessons and regroup, but for sure, when they do return to the fight alongside Russian forces, it really is putting pressure on the Ukrainian troops inside Kursk. But for as long as they're in Kursk, they say they are taking the war to Russia.
OK, for now, thank you. Weather warnings are in place across the country today as Storm Armenia arrives in the UK. In a moment, we'll get an update from the Met Office, but first joined by Dan, who is standing by for us in Porthcawl. Hi, what's it like where you are? Morning.
Morning, Kay. Yeah, very blustery. As you say, Storm Armenia coming in from Spain and France over the weekend is now affecting parts of the UK. We had Storm Iowyn over the last few days. That has now moved away, and we're feeling the after effects of that new storm, which was named by meteorologists over in Spain. We're here in Porthcawl in South Wales. High tide isn't until midday today, but you can already see that the winds are bringing in the seas crashing and foaming nearly to the wall here. It's very blustery and it is very nasty. The weather warnings in place are for wind and rain, and one started at 6 o'clock this morning for the next 24 hours, bringing gusts of up to 60 miles an hour, and we can start to feel those here on the coast. But all that rain that's fallen over the last few days, that is still causing problems, and there is a weather warning for rain in place for Wales and in the West Midlands today. And that has resulted in quite a few flood alerts. We've got around 15 in Wales, we've got around 50 in England, and 173 flood alerts in England and 51 flood warnings. So there's lots of potential for floods across the UK, and we expect this blustering, this wet weather to continue right through until the end of Tuesday. As we start that working week, we can expect the disruption on the transport networks again, potentials for flights to be cancelled and delayed, and trains. We saw, of course, Ireland really taking the battering at the end of last week, and sadly 2 young men lost their lives, one in Ireland and one in Scotland. But over the weekend, we saw thousands of people had their power cut down in Devon and Cornwall. So it's particularly the southwest of England that is really feeling the effects of the Storm Armenia this morning. And you can see that this wind and this rain is going to continue to batter. We expect this blustery and wet weather to continue right through until the end of Tuesday.
OK, for now, thank you. Let's bring in Alex Deakin, Senior Broadcast Meteorologist at the Met Office. Always good to see you, Alex. So, Tuesday before it gets better, is that right?
Thanks, Kay. Good morning. Yeah, it's going to be a blustery day right across the land today. Heavy showers around, but there are signs that, later in the week in particular, it should finally start to calm down. But the next couple of days, be aware, some very heavy downpours. And as we just heard, there's a warning in place until 6 o'clock tomorrow morning for those gusty winds. The rain, I think, is going to cause more problems. Already it's causing problems on some roads, particularly around where I am down in Devon, the Met Office HQ. There's problems around, and as we've heard, already some flood warnings and flood alerts in place. So that could get worse before it gets better as well. But the signs are certainly second half of the week an awful lot calmer. So that's some good news.
Where's it all coming from?
Well, there's a really strong jet stream at the moment. It's actually all tied into that cold spell across the United States last week. That's what drove or supercharged the jet stream. So a really powerful jet, that fast-moving ribbon of air high up in the sky. That's what charges our weather. That's what drives low-pressure systems. That's what the storms are, effectively, low-pressure systems. The one last week, particularly powerful with Storm Eowyn. That really intensified just to the west of Ireland. That's why the Republic of Ireland was so badly hit, along with Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. This current storm's still mulling around out in the to the west of Ireland. Not as intense, thankfully, but the jet is still pretty lively, which is why our weather systems are remaining pretty lively through the next few days. Further heavy downpours, further thunderstorms, potential for hailstones as well and gusty winds. But as I say, it does tend to shift. The jet is on the move. So later in the week, high pressure moves in and things calm down.
OK, for now, thanks very much, Alex. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. It's a racing revolution, speaking to the experts behind a new fuel source being used to power the next generation of motorsport.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
You are not getting in this elevator, okay?
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Sakulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Free wherever you get your news. This is what they're up against. The wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? This is the exact spot in Nottingham where their 19-year-old son, Barnaby Webber, lost his life.
I just think it's so cruel and so harsh.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
Sky News gets the full story first. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. It's legal to let go. Set the speed and take the hands off. It's almost driverless, but not quite. Hands is a highly trained police dog. The force is incredible. It's really frightening, actually. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Now, could your bathroom habits end up powering the next generation of race cars? Joining us is Dr. James Meredith, Chief Engineer at Warwick Manufacturing Group, and Professor Kerry Kerwin, Deputy Pro-Vice-Chancellor for the University of Warwick. It's good to see you both, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Tell me about your poop-powered car.
Morning, Kate. It's not actually powered directly by poo. What we've essentially got is some clever bugs that what they do is they eat the sewage that's in your water treatment plants, and actually, like we give off carbon dioxide, they give off hydrogen. And so we're able to tap that hydrogen and use that as a fuel source. So it's sort of like a free byproduct from the water treatment process.
And tell me a little bit more about how it's going to operate.
So essentially, we can take the hydrogen off, compress it, and then we can either put it directly into an internal combustion engine, or we can flow it over a fuel cell to give us electricity and drive motors. So we've got all options available to us. It's quite a flexible platform we've got here.
And tell me more about how it's going to be used. Are we going to see it as racing cars, or is it going to be instead of the Grand Prix? I don't know.
So essentially, what this is a platform, and we're using it as to basically demonstrate as many sustainability ideas as we can. So we've got things like recycled magnets in the motors, we've got battery that's been recovered from a crashed car, and essentially we want industry, other academics to come to us and say, actually, we've got this great idea for sustainability, and we want to put it on this car and demonstrate it. In terms of whether it ever makes it into the real world in racing, I think some of the work we did sort of 10 or 15 years ago on racing cars, actually, the natural fiber composites, the recycled materials, some of that is already now in motorsport and indeed in mainstream automotive. So I think there's sort of approximately 5, 10, 15 years it takes for some of these ideas to make their way through.
OK. I mean, it looks like a sports car, doesn't it? So what sort of speeds is it going to be able to do?
Well, it'll have plenty of power. We've got sort of 550 horsepower from the engine. We've got an extra 250 horsepower from motors. So it'll have a very good top speed. We're not entirely sure what record we want to go for yet, because there's actually some really impressive hydrogen records out there at the moment. So exactly what we go for, we'll hedge our bets a little bit. We don't know.
And how do you refuel it?
You just plug in a pipe and it pumps hydrogen into it, basically.
But, I mean, can you just get hydrogen anywhere?
No.
Not like stopping on the motorway, is it?
That is quite a challenge. There are not many hydrogen fueling stations around the place. We do have one in North Birmingham. There's a couple in actually some of the automotive test centres around us actually do have hydrogen on site. So we are able to get it, but it isn't exactly freely available at the moment.
Oh, it's amazing. And if people wanted to see it, where did they go?
So we're here at the University of Warwick. It's our 60th anniversary. It's our Festival of Innovation today. So we're at the Arts Centre, but there are other things going on around campus. So if you're in the vicinity, it'll be here all day, along with our previous car, World First, which was a Formula 3 car. Come along, have a look, and enjoy the day.
It's good to see you guys. Thanks very much indeed for getting up early for us. Appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Speaking of cars, tell us about the couple that wanted to collect a car from Crewe, and they were in Cornwall. So which way did they go?
Well, they didn't go the way you'd expect them to go, which is north. They went south. They flew to Malaga. It's an incredible story in the papers this morning, where they worked out that instead of spending several hundreds of pounds on a train where, I think as the couple said, you're not guaranteed a seat, and goodness knows how many delays and stuff they could have faced with. Instead, they got a flight down to Spain, spent 7 hours, 8 hours in the sunshine, had a couple of beers, a bit of tapas, I hope, flew back up to Manchester, picked up the car and crew, and then drove back down to Cornwall. I mean, we hear these stories, don't we, every now and again, of people realising that flights are cheaper than train tickets, but this really is absolutely staggering story.
Yeah, properly taking the biscuit, isn't it? I was trying to see on that little graph on the, but you can't see in the paper. We'll sort that out for next hour, and then we can actually see the journey that they took. It's impossible to see with that, isn't it? It's just too small. Good for them, though, and they had a holiday at the same time.
A little trip. More interesting than a bit of time on a train, I guess.
It reminds me of when Claire Irvin was talking about extreme day tripping. Yes. Do you remember? And people go for a day and they come back and they haven't got to pay for a hotel. And they essentially did an extreme day trip while collecting the car. So a bit of admin and a bit of fun.
Good for them.
Yeah.
Good for them. Gen Z, we've been talking. Gen Z? Gen Z. I don't know where that came from. It's Monday morning.
It does sound better. Gen Z does sound better,
but it's wrong.
Does it? Yeah, no, nobody says Z in this country. My husband says Z and I tell him off all the time.
Do you?
Ugh, I hate it, yeah.
And apparently they want half of Gen Z, which I think is what age?
13 to 27, I think, in this study, certainly.
Yeah.
I slightly struggle with my millennials.
Happy to be happy to have the country run by a dictator.
Yeah.
It's worrying, isn't it? It is worrying, and Murray and I were talking about this. This also comes on the day that, as coined, the last dictator of Europe has just been elected in Belarus under a sham election, and all of the opposition are either in prison or in exile. It comes on the day that, you know, we remember Holocaust Memorial Day and the liberation of Auschwitz, and that, you know, there are young people now who are thinking maybe dictators are better than the current system of democracy that we have, and we've seen what dictatorships end up like.
Yeah.
You know, and Murray, you made the point that this is, in many respects, a failure of politicians.
Yeah, I really believe that, because I think that actually if people are so tired or disenchanted with politics in this country that they feel a dictatorship would be better, as you say, considering what we've seen from dictatorships and we know how that all plays out, I think that really speaks to a failure of politicians in British politics to persuade those young people that democracy is worth keeping. And I think that actually all MPs on all sides of the House have a responsibility to prove that that is worth keeping and worth fighting for. And if they are not doing that job, well, they need to do better.
Yeah. Generation Z typically includes those born from 1997 to 2012, 2015.
Wow. Okay.
So the age range is between 10 and 28.
Yeah.
Millennials, do you know what millennials are? How can millennials not be over the millennials? I mean,
I know. Is millennials like 1996 to like 1980 or something? It's really weird.
Very good.
Is it something like
you could be on the quiz team.
That's the Gryffindor.
Look at me. 1981 to 1996.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, you were only a year out. Yeah, 29 to 44. 44, oh goodness. I'm a baby boomer. Let's not do that. Should we just pass over that one?
For your outrage of 44K.
OK, and the other story that we have been concentrating on this morning, of course, is what's happening in Gaza. And we've seen the Palestinians returning to northern Gaza today. Many tens of thousands are presently on the road. You can see with the panel there on your right-hand side of the screen. Sarah will show you in more detail. There you go. On the way back, the big question is, though, what will be there when they get there?
Yeah, and just look at these images, how little people have as well. Some of them barely with bags on their shoulders. That is the impact of 15 months of conflict that has seen at least 47,000 people killed and 60, if not % more buildings either damaged or destroyed. And like you said there, Kay, returning to see what is left. And, you know, we talk of, in the ceasefire deal, of a 3 to 5 year rebuilding period. Well, it's going to take decades. It's going to take decades. And then we've heard the comments from Donald Trump that kind of question all of that in its entirety.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have this kind of weird juxtaposition between, you know, Donald Trump being praised by Keir Starmer for achieving this ceasefire in the Middle East, and then simultaneously Donald Trump talking about removing people from Gaza and putting them in, you know, Egypt, Jordan, despite the fact that they say they don't want to leave, they want to be there, they say that's their home.
Yeah, some might call that ethnic cleansing, I suppose.
Well, that's been some of the accusations that's come out, hasn't it, Kay? And so, you know, quite concerning rhetoric, I think.
Yeah. Let's leave it there for now, guys. We will be back in just a couple of moments' time, though, with all today's top stories, including the very latest on what is happening in Gaza and the latest storm hitting the UK. Do stay tuned for more.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Morning, everybody. 8 o'clock coming up on today's programme for you. Israel allows Palestinians to return to northern Gaza in a deal that will see 6 hostages freed this week.
Plus, a warm and personable chat. Sir Keir Starmer becomes the first European leader to speak to Donald Trump since his inauguration.
And the debate that spanned decades, should Britain's biggest airport, Heathrow, be expanded?
It's Monday, the 27th of January. Israel allows nearly 500,000 Palestinians to return to northern Gaza for the first time in more than a year.
Some issues that had threatened to derail the fragile ceasefire have been resolved. Tens of thousands of Gazans are returning home, and 6 hostages will be released in the coming days.
Sky News reports from the front line where Ukrainian special forces are confronting North Korean troops. The King will become the first British monarch to visit Auschwitz today, 80 years on from its liberation. Keir Starmer and Donald Trump agreed to meet soon, settling the path for a state visit by the US president.
Another named storm is set to hit the UK, bringing gale force winds, rain and snow. We'll have the very latest from Porthcawl here in Wales.
Good morning, everybody. Israel is allowing nearly 500,000 Palestinians to return to northern Gaza for the first time in more than a year. Let's get more, should we? Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle joining us from Jerusalem. Update us, if you would, please, Alistair.
Well, let's go back to the weekend when we saw the second hostage prisoner exchange deal. And Israel was expecting an Israeli female hostage called Arbel Yehud to be released as part of that deal. She wasn't. And so Israel accused Hamas of violating the ceasefire agreement, and as a result, they didn't withdraw their forces from what's known as the Netzarim corridor, which basically divides Gaza between north and south. And that issue has now been resolved this morning, and so a number of things are now happening. The most immediate thing is this return of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians now on foot, making their way back to the north of Gaza in extraordinary pictures. They have been displaced over recent months, pushed down to the humanitarian zone Al-Mawasi, living in tented camps in often terrible conditions. They are now able to return to the north of Gaza with some freedom. What they will find there, though, many of them will find, is homes have been completely destroyed. The likes of Gaza City has been demolished across much of the residential areas. But they do finally have a bit more freedom to move around the Gaza Strip. And that will be significant because there is real doubts as to whether or not this first phase can enter into a second phase. There is pressure from some corners of the Israeli public and Israeli politicians to return to the fighting in Gaza. But having spent so much time trying to move Gazans into a humanitarian zone so that the Israeli forces could operate freely within Gaza, the return of Gazans to all parts of Gaza will make it much harder for Israel to resume fighting if it wants to. And the final bit that is significant in terms of the resolution that's been found by the mediators is that Arbel Yehud will now be released this week, along with 2 other hostages. She'll be released in the coming days, and then on Saturday, there'll be a further 3 hostages released. So 6 hostages in total released this week, and obviously in return as well, dozens and dozens of Palestinian prisoners.
OK, Alistair, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Mari's here. There's been a phone call between Sir Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. They're buddies.
Yes, they're busy mates now, it looks like, from what we're hearing. So
must be furious.
I know. I think Keir Starmer will be quite pleased with that one.
Yeah.
So Keir Starmer and Donald Trump yesterday, they had this phone call, as you say, and we got a readout from Downing Street, kind of giving us the highlights, let's say. It was a 45-minute phone call, but what we do know is that President Trump started by offering his condolences to Keir Starmer for the death of his brother that happened over Christmas. And then also the Prime Minister paid tribute to Keir Starmer, Donald Trump, his ability to achieve that ceasefire in the Middle East. And some of the stuff you were just talking about with Ali Bunkel is interesting in terms of how much of that rhetoric is perhaps undermining that achievement. But nonetheless, they then went on to talk about trade and UK-US relations. And what was really interesting to me, the most interesting line in that readout, was where the PM said, how we are deregulating to boost growth. That will have been music to Donald Trump's ears. We know that deregulation is something he really wants to focus on to improve the US economy. But nonetheless, it's something that you wouldn't necessarily often hear from a left-wing government, a Labour government, which is why I think it was interesting. Clearly, Keir Starmer's trying to kind of, please Donald Trump and perhaps show that they have some level of common ground on trying to boost both nations' economies. But there was a slightly different tone in the White House readout, where that ended by saying they discussed how both countries can promote a fair bilateral economic relationship. So perhaps slightly more corporate, slightly less emotive, perhaps, in the tone from the White House in comparison to the tone from Downing Street. But nonetheless, I think overall, Downing Street's going to be really quite pleased with the tone of language we've heard from Donald Trump about the UK. He also spoke to journalists recently saying that he thought Keir Starmer was doing a good job. So it looks like things are relatively smooth sailing for now. The couple of areas where they're still going to be quite nervous is tariffs. We still don't know what tariffs might be potentially imposed on the UK. And second of all, whether or not Donald Trump is going to accept Keir Starmer's choice of ambassador to the US as well. We still don't know the answers to those.
Yeah, Lord Mandelson, of course. But no, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, after a weekend of chaos that saw 2 people killed, a hospital lose power and travel disrupted right across the country, another named storm is bringing more wild wind. Let's get more, should we? Dan's standing by for us in Porthcawl this morning. Hello to you, Dan. What's it like? Oh, it's picking up there, isn't it?
Really is starting to pick up here, Kay. High tide in Porthcawl isn't right until midday, but you can see that the waves are already crashing over the breakwater behind me. And as you say, there's another named storm coming in, Storm Armenia, which has been named in Spain. It's battered France and Spain over the weekend, and we're now starting to get the effects of that after Storm Iowyn has moved on. Of course, that caused huge disruption, mainly in Ireland and up in Scotland over the last 3 days or so. It led to those 2 young men losing their lives after trees fell on their cars in Scotland and Ireland. That storm has moved away, but it left a lot of disruption over the weekend. There were thousands of people out without power down in Devon and Cornwall. So those problems continue into the new week, and now we're getting Storm Armenia. What does that mean? Well, we've got 2 weather warnings in place at the minute. Yellow weather warnings for rain and for wind. The wind one kicked in at 6 o'clock this morning, and that lasts right through until 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. So it's going to go right through today, right through until tomorrow morning as well. That affects Wales. It affects much of southern England and the east of England and London as well. There's also a weather warning in place for rain, a yellow weather warning mainly affecting the East Midlands and Wales. So that is the weather warnings in place. That has resulted in a number of flood warnings, more than 170 flood alerts in place in England and dozens of flood warnings in Wales as well. So that is a concern. And of course, that is going to result in disruption on the transport system, on the roads, the rails and the planes. Check before you travel. But that weather warning from Armenia now starting to come in, and we're expecting gusts here on coastal areas of the southwest and South Wales of up to 70 miles an hour.
OK, for now. Thank you, Rachel. So we need to batten down the hatches for another 24 hours at least?
Yes, again, yeah, absolutely. I think it's not going to be until Wednesday, really, that we see this weather really start to settle, and then in towards the rest of the week, according to the Met Office anyway, things should be looking good. But you saw those pictures there. I mean, the waves behind Dan were absolutely incredible. I was amazed he could still stand at places there at points during his report. And we've seen, haven't we, those incredible and really quite disturbing and alarming pictures over the last couple of days, certainly from Storm Iowyn, which, as we know, left 2 young men dead after trees fell on their cars in Scotland and Ireland, but then almost immediately after that finished battering parts of the UK. We also had this storm Hermenia, which has been named by Spanish meteorologists. So this low-pressure system Much worse in Spain, much worse in France as we understand it, but we're still seeing the impact, aren't we, here this morning and over the next 24 hours as well with those yellow weather warnings. And of course, the point of storms, the real problem when we do have high amounts of rain in places like Cornwall, for example, we're seeing 34, 33 millimetres of rain on Sunday, Devon, similar numbers, and those huge winds as well, around 80 miles an hour. The problem is all of this rain is landing on ground that is already sodden, and that means that flooding is all the more likely. And we know there are huge numbers of flood alerts, around 40 flood warnings in place as well. And it just adds more pressure, doesn't it, onto the emergency services and onto all of those teams who are working so hard to keep us going, as it were, to pick up from flooding and also to keep the trains on the tracks and everything else that we need to keep running.
Absolutely. For now, thanks very much. Thank you. Have a look at these live pictures of commemorations marking 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. And these are the latest images that we have. The King will become the first British monarch to visit Auschwitz today. And 8 years on from its liberation, 6 million Jews were systematically murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. These are images of the Polish president. As I said, we will see the King a little bit later on this afternoon. Extensive coverage for you here on Sky News. Siobhan Robbins reports.
Simon wasn't meant to survive. As a child, Nazis sent him to die. He remembers the day evil came to his door and took him, his mother and sister away.
The doorbell rang and all three of us froze. The front door opened and two men entered shouting, "Gestapo, papers." My mother got up, as white as a sheet, and handed over her ID card, her passport. The Nazi took a look at it and appeared satisfied. Yes, this is the Granovsky family. You have been denounced.
Simon was just 11 when he was arrested with his mother Shanna and sister Ita in Belgium. Their crime, being Jewish. Their punishment, execution at Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland. They'd been packed with more than 1,000 others on a Nazi death train heading towards this hell, when a resistance attack gave Simon a chance to escape.
I jumped from the train and I heard the soldiers running in my direction, firing gunshots and shouting. I jumped from the train because I obeyed my mother. If she had told me to stay with her, then I'd never have left her side. And I would have died with her in the gas chamber.
In the chaos, Simon says he fled into the woods and kept running until a local family gave him refuge. 3 days later, his mother was dead. She and Simon's sister were among more than 1 million people murdered at Auschwitz. Practiced and precise extermination, many starved, shot, gassed, or worked to death. All over the world, Auschwitz has become a symbol of terror, genocide, and the Holocaust, the darkest acts of humanity that should never be repeated. As survivors prepare to return here for the 80th anniversary of the camp's liberation, Simon's making his own pilgrimage to Auschwitz, to the place he calls the Factory of Death, where his sister and mother now rest. A place where he tells young people about the crimes of the past to prevent a repeat in the present.
I want to inform the young people of the barbarity of yesterday for defend our democracy of today.
Simon, a witness to the greatest crime in history, issuing a warning in divided times. Auschwitz is a lasting reminder of humanity at its most inhumane. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Auschwitz.
And Siobhan joins us now live from Auschwitz. What's the plan for later, Siobhan? Good morning.
Well, the events have already started and a very moving ceremony is taking place right now at Auschwitz I. I'm at Auschwitz-Birkenau, which of course is that sprawling extension to the first camp. But at the first camp, We've seen a group of around 50 survivors carrying wreaths, carrying candles, supported by loved ones, and they are laying the wreaths, putting down the candles in memory of more than 1 million people who were killed here at Auschwitz under the Nazis. And of course, many of those people were starved, shot, gassed, or worked to death. And this is the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And 5 years ago, when that same event was taking place, around 200 survivors were able to come back and make that journey. This time, it's just 50. Many people too traumatized, too old, unable to really sit for long in this cold weather. So it really underlines how poignant today is. And later today, those survivors will be taking place in a ceremony which will be happening here. And you can see in the background the concentration camp, Birkenau, here. And it would have been here in the huts that the detainees would have been made to sleep in this freezing weather, these freezing huts, overpacked with rickety bunks, filled with disease. They had little food, horrendous conditions, beaten, traumatized, and they will return here to remember what happened. And the survivors will give speeches talking about not only their experiences, but their hopes for the future, because many of them are concerned about the fact that if they're no longer here to tell their stories, then the world's memory will fade. Now, this is an event that for the first time is being attended by King Charles. He's the first British monarch to come here to Auschwitz. He will be taking part in that. He'll also be meeting Holocaust survivors as the world remembers the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz.
Thank you very much indeed, Siobhan. Thank you. A decade ago, 300 Holocaust survivors attended. This year, only 50 will be able to make the journey to Auschwitz. And please join us from 2 p.m. for a special programme on the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz. We'll bring you live coverage of the ceremony from Poland. Rest of today's news for you now. Here's Gareth.
Yes, good morning. Bring up to speed on some of the day's other stories now. Rwandan-backed rebels have captured the city of Goma in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Congolese government says it amounts to a declaration of war, and the UN has described mass panic among the 2 million people living there. Swedish authorities have seized a ship suspected of sabotaging an underwater cable in the Baltic Sea. NATO has begun patrols in recent weeks to stop repeated attacks on underwater power and telecom cables, some of which have been blamed on Russia, which Russia denies. The government is to introduce a deposit return scheme for plastic bottles and cans. They hope it will increase the amount of containers which are recycled to around 90%. And pharmacists are calling for tougher rules over the sale of online weight loss jabs. The National Pharmacy Association warns that online retailers are treating the drugs like grocery items at a checkout and says that weight loss jabs should only be available after face-to-face consultations.
Now, could football fans in England soon be able to enjoy a pint at their seat in the stand? What's the answer?
Well, they are for now in the Women's Championship, but just as part of trials to see if it's going to be safe enough to gradually introduce drinking back into football in the stand. And I've been to Birmingham City to take a look at the pilot. Drinking in the stands stopped in English football in 1985 to stop hooliganism. For now, only in the women's game again. Birmingham City part of trials in the Championship.
So many children here, though. Loads of people bring their children, so I don't think people would cause much trouble.
I don't think so, no.
No.
The only bitter taste, losing to promotion rivals Bristol City.
And it's a dream start for Bristol City. I think it's a stupid idea. I hate it. Never do it.
You need to drown your sorrows.
I was going to say, yeah, we do.
We shall have a lovely time and watch lovely football and enjoy each other's company and have a lovely drink while we're at it.
And it works in every other sector. Why shouldn't it work?
Just as it does in cricket, rugby and horse racing. But Scottish football is the most restrictive. Not a drop can be poured for most fans in stadiums. Top four. In Birmingham's other game yesterday at Aston Villa, not a drink in sight. But as usual in the Men's Premier League, they were flowing in the concourses away from sight of the pitch.
I think beers in the ground and watching the game is possibly
should be on the cards. The 80s is gone. 90s with the thugs, I think, is gone now.
But all football-related arrests last season were around men's games.
These fans are the pioneers, being able to drink inside football matches during the game for the first time in 4 decades. But the sense is, in men's football, the crowds are just too intense to avoid the chaos that could be caused by allowing boozing in the stands.
Last thing you want to do if you're not drinking is be soaked in beer when the beer goes up. So I don't think at a men's game I'd want it, to be honest.
And for Birmingham City's CEO, providing a different fan experience at women's matches could grow crowds and help players.
If they spend a bit more money, it just puts more money back into the women's game and we all benefit. And we will only know how big a first step it will be once we get through the trials, see the results.
Hoping to show it's safe to down pints in the stands again. For now, they're taking it sip by sip.
What's your thought? What's going to happen?
Well, the women's game has a lot less tribalism. The fans are better behaved, and it's also a way of raising the revenue, which really they do need to grow the game. But there are issues in the men's game as well. You can't drink in the stands down to the 5th division. So if you're playing in the 6th division and you get promoted, you can actually lose out on cash because you can no longer have fans in who can have a drink in their hands. But the police have said they're a bit concerned. They've looked in Germany, particularly with England fans there at the tournament, thinking if there's drink, then it gets thrown during celebrations, and that just creates more policing challenges, although that is their appeal, to get more officers, and the club's paying more to bring the police officers into the stadiums.
OK, for now, thanks, Rob. Thank you. Rachel Reeves has all but confirmed plans to endorse a 3rd runway at Heathrow, as well as expansions at Gatwick and Luton as well. The Shadow Business Minister, Harriet Baldwin, is joining us now. Hello to you. It's good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. What's your position?
Well, I voted for Heathrow in 2018, I think it was. And what is it? We're 7 years on, and I don't see that this is something that's going to have an immediate impact on growth, because I don't think there's something that's just going to go in for planning permission right away. But what I do think is important is the signal that it sends that the UK is open for business. So I welcome that. But I'm more concerned about the impact that some of the decisions that the Chancellor took in her budget last October are having on the UK economy. I think it could very well be the case that we're already in what we could term Rachel's
Harriet,
recession.
if I could bring you back to what I was asking you about, that would be great. Thank you. They've been talking about Heathrow being expanded, though, some say since 1946. Others telling me that it was in a white paper in 2005. So even if it is agreed, then I'm guessing that it's a long time before we're going to see any expansion at Heathrow.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was agreeing with you about, Kay, because I voted for it in 2018. And as you say, it hasn't happened. And it's not something that's on the immediate cards. And I don't think it's going to have an immediate impact in terms of UK economic growth. And we are in a very worrying situation in terms of UK economic growth, because it's clear that the government is failing on its growth mission.
Are you concerned about the environmental impact at all?
I think that it's, something that happens is that we fly in aeroplanes, and we need to obviously work as a world to make that more sustainable. But we are a global trading nation in the UK. It's really important that we have those links with our trading partners, and that business goes to seek export markets. So I think it's an important part of what we do as a country. And as you know, it's been at very high capacity for a long period of time.
Yeah, I know that you want to be critical of this government, but we believe that President Trump was on the phone to Keir Starmer for 45 minutes yesterday, and we're told that he says he's doing a very good job.
No, it's great to hear that the UK Prime Minister and the US President had a constructive conversation yesterday. Obviously, we are very close allies of the US. It's a special relationship, and I'm very pleased to hear that they had a constructive conversation, and look forward to welcoming President Trump to the UK soon. We are the biggest investors in each other's economies. What I would love to have seen in that readout is that they discussed a free trade agreement agreement, because I think that's an area where there's real potential for the UK and the US to help both citizens of both countries to prosper, and that having stronger trading links between our two countries, although they're already strong, will be something that will help growth. So I look forward to hearing that they're going to work on a free trade agreement together, because they were working on one when we were in power and Trump was last in power.
Indeed so. But the point he was making, or I was trying to make to you, was that he says that Sir Keir is doing a very good job. Would you agree?
Well, I think it was clearly a very diplomatic call, and I'm glad that they had a friendly and constructive call. And I think it's really important that they have a good relationship. I'm pleased to hear that they had a good call. And I would like to hear that positivity taken forward in terms of working out how we can do even more business together, even more trade together, because I am very concerned about the UK's growth at the moment. I think that the budget ramifications from the choices that the Chancellor made back in October are feeding through into a very worrying picture in terms of the UK economy. And it's important that the government takes steps to not only lean into this positive relationship with the US, but also learn the lessons of what's gone wrong with the budget and move forward in terms of creating a better environment for investment for businesses in the UK, because clearly the budget was very damaging to growth.
Good to see you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, Kay.
Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. The PM and President agree to meet as soon as possible. We'll have more on the phone call coming up.
When you cover big, tense protests, there's almost always a moment when the atmosphere changes. There's a different noise, and you start to smell tear gas in the air.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world: Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
When we spoke to the fishermen down in Cornwall, all the politics from Westminster was a million miles away. This was about their jobs, their livelihoods.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
And again, everybody, welcome back to the Breakfast Show here on Sky News. More news on not this storm, but the previous storm.
The previous storm, yeah, Storm Eowyn, which is still being felt across certainly parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland as well, where the clean-up operation, the desire to return homes to power, but also to clear the tracks, to put trains back on track, is still ongoing. And we've just had an update from the Northern Ireland Electricity Networks team. They say approximately 65,000 customers, Kay, remain without electricity across Northern Ireland. So that's still a huge number of people, many tens of thousands. They say that power has been restored, though, to some 220,000 properties. And they basically say that their incident centre remains open, and they're urging people to stay clear of hazards. Remember, some of the roads will be really, really impassable at the minute, and to report damage, they say, to them as well. But that's really key, that Monday morning, of course, 65,000 customers still remaining without electricity across Northern Ireland. So a huge operation for the team to try to restore, to reconnect those homes and businesses back to power after that weekend, which battered large parts of the UK, but most specifically, of course, Northern Ireland and Scotland.
And we saw some deaths, unfortunately,
two
as a result
deaths
of this latest storm.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 deaths, sadly, over the weekend, 2 young men, one in Scotland, one in Ireland, killed when trees fell on their vehicles. And we're also seeing now the pictures, of course, and around the UK, the impact of a new storm. This is Storm Erminia, named by Spanish meteorologists. That's where it's hit worse, but it means we're still seeing really huge amounts of wind. So 80 miles an hour wind recorded in places like the north of Wales, also in South Devon. Huge numbers of rainfall as well. And we've got around 40 weather flood alerts as well, flood warnings, in fact, throughout large parts of the UK, certainly south of England, up into the East Midlands as well, and then huge parts of Wales and the southwest. And this is because one of the real issues that the Met Office are concerned about is that this huge amount of rain that we're seeing is landing on ground that is already completely sodden and saturated, so the risk of flooding is just so much higher.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Rest of the stories?
Yes, that's many of our headlines this morning. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are being allowed back home into northern Gaza after Israel and Hamas agreed on the release of more hostages and prisoners as part of that ceasefire deal. Keir Starmer has become the first European leader to speak with Donald Trump since his inauguration. The 45-minute conversation described as warm and personable, and they agreed to meet soon. Sky News has gained rare access to Ukrainian special forces and heard how North Korean troops fighting on behalf of Russia in the war are suffering heavy losses. Events are due to take place marking 80 years since the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp in Nazi-occupied Poland.
Now, main man is here on his own.
He left me. He left me. He's abandoned me. He's 5,000 miles away. Jack has relocated to Washington, D.C.
Who did you do the show with this morning, then?
This morning with Anne McElvoy, Executive Editor of Politico.
Indeed so. And no big announcements today because of Holocaust Memorial Day.
Nothing into the day, no government minister on the round. Doesn't mean politics is paused, but on our TV screens, I think rightly, everyone will stop and remember what happened 80 years ago with the liberation of Auschwitz. But behind the scenes, we're gearing up for effectively Rachel Reeves' big week. On Wednesday, she's got a major speech on growth, and that's going to wrap together quite a lot of the announcements that we've seen over the last 7 days, explaining how this government is going to bring back growth as its top priority after, frankly, a bumpy few weeks and months.
How much pressure is she under? That's her at Davos, I'm guessing.
So she's not under much pressure politically. The polls might be bad, but Labour have got a big majority, and her own side are more or less OK. Where the pressure comes for Rachel Reeves is, bluntly, externally, it's the markets. Now, 2 weeks ago, she was actually looking under, if not quite in peril, then there were red flashing lights on the dashboard because the cost of government borrowing had peaked really uncomfortably high. Now, it's come back down since then, and the government looks like it's got a bit more of a plan. I think the markets are going to continue to mark Rachel Reeves' homework pretty much for her time as Chancellor, because she had a budget last year which really sailed very close to the wind in terms of how much money she decided to borrow against her own limits and what that means for Britain in the future. But it's a little bit less, and I think she had a slightly better 10 days, couple of weeks, with all of these announcements building to Wednesday's speech.
OK. And also, we believe that there's a bit of a bromance going on between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer, with Trump saying that Starmer's doing a good job.
You only have to look in sort of split screen, right? Donald Trump and Keir Starmer spoke for 45 minutes yesterday, and according to the readout, the UK side and some of the words we've had coming out of America, it was warm. Donald Trump, in public, says that he likes Keir Starmer because he is a fellow Liberal. He admits he doesn't like everything that he's doing, but rather than emphasising on their differences, and we're told that the Labour Party and the Republican Party are at odds and there is tension there, Donald Trump is choosing to be nice. Now, I said at the start, split screen, because you just have to look at what's happening over with other countries in the Americas. Donald Trump picking big, angry fights with neighbours in the Americas, and the moment that they refuse to take back migrants on American military planes, then he threatens to slap them with 25%, 50% tariffs. None of that kind of stuff was in the readout of the call that took place between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. Now, a 45-minute call isn't adequately represented by a 250-word readout, so there are clearly lots of things that we don't know about, particularly whether or not Lord Mandelson will end up being the ambassador, the British ambassador to Washington. Downing Street thinks so, but there have been lots of noises and rumblings that that's not a done deal.
He's been very rude about Donald Trump in the past.
He has, and the question is Peter Mandelson going to be somebody who just sucks up the limelight for himself, or is he actually going to help British interests? There are some in the Labour Party who are sceptical about that as well. But that is a hope that we start off on a good footing. Also in the context, in the last few days of Donald Trump having an incredibly aggressive conversation with Denmark's Prime Minister about Greenland and its future. So America possibly breaking with the EU. Can Britain sit in the centre of that relationship and be the conciliator and the bridge, as it has so often over the last 70 years? Is that possible with Donald Trump in the White House? Or can you be Donald Trump's friend one day, as Theresa May found out, and then be at the centre of a storm just a few months later?
Wait until Donald Trump finds out that if Greenland is up for sale, that Britain has first dibs on it because of our relationship previously with Canada, and then let's see how friendly they are. What about the Heathrow runway?
So, as part of Rachel Reeves' package of announcements, that's one that they're sort of holding back until Wednesday, but frankly has been briefed and we sort of know is coming. Now, this has been a long-running saga for as long as I've been in political journalism, Kay.
Yeah.
The first white paper, the government paper about Heathrow being the preferred option, came in 2004 with Tony Blair, and it still hasn't been decided. Ed Miliband nearly resigned from Gordon Brown's government over the third runway. He didn't, and I wouldn't expect him to do so now, but it's back on the tables. And I think what we'll get on Wednesday is a signal from Rachel Reeves that if Heathrow asks for a third runway, and there's no application in at the moment, but if they ask, then the government will do what it can to facilitate it.
The flag carrier doesn't want it, though, does it?
There are lots of people who don't want it, including, even more complicated, the mayors, the London mayor, the Manchester mayor, and there is some scepticism around the cabinet table, but I am told every cabinet minister is being brought in and has bought into all of Rachel Reeves' plans, which also include taking a look again at the rules about nature and habitat and the environment that often cause some complications for planning, and also look again at that system of judicial review that often ends up with big planning projects ending up in the court. So streamlining that is the plan, and steamrolling her colleagues seems to be what Rachel Reeves is doing.
And finally, John Prescott's funeral this week?
Labour on Thursday, the sort of Labour grandees decamped to Hull for a day, I suspect, of storytelling and fond remembrance of somebody who was an integral part of the Labour Party. Traditional politics in a modern setting was one of John Prescott's phrases, and he was a moderniser who nevertheless looked like and felt like he represented the old guard. He played a very important role sort of as a bridge between two wings of the Labour Party that Tony Blair needed to keep together when he was in government. I don't think there are... I think people in Keir Starmer's administration will be looking at John Prescott and his history and his role in the Labour Party as somebody to learn lessons from. An interesting, complicated, flawed guy whose life will be celebrated on Thursday.
For now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Is it going to be Anne again tomorrow? Or
Always. Always. We never give up. Never stop.
OK, thank you. North Korean troops appear to have temporarily pulled back from the front line in Russia after suffering heavy losses in their first clashes with Ukrainian soldiers. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes reports from a secret base in northeastern Ukraine, and a warning: this report contains distressing images.
Control.
Ukrainian special forces move in on a unit of North Koreans that's just been hit by drones and artillery. they take no chances. The soldiers say Kim Jong-un's men have been known to blow themselves up with grenades on the battlefield rather than be captured alive.
Honestly, I didn't feel any pity for them. These people came from the other side of the world to fight against us on behalf of the enemy.
Sky News spoke exclusively to a commando who was on the operation inside the Russian region of Kursk. He says their task was to gather evidence to prove North Korean forces are fighting in the war, something neither Pyongyang nor Moscow have officially confirmed.
We are cutting hair for DNA testing. We take a sample from under the lip with a cotton swab. And of course we take tags that might indicate their presence, documents, military ID cards.
The ID cards are Russian, seemingly a clumsy attempt to mask identities. Evidence too, though, of real lives and loved ones back home. The commander of the Special Forces unit said the first time his men spotted North Koreans was on the 15th of December.
Unlike the Russians, who previously operated in smaller groups, we were now seeing groups of 20, 40 or even 60 men moving with remarkable speed. We began coordinating artillery strikes. What was unusual in this case was that they didn't retreat.
He shows us what he says is footage of dozens of North Korean soldiers killed fighting to help Moscow retake a chunk of Kursk that was captured by Ukraine last year. Kyiv says some 4,000 out of 11,000 North Koreans deployed to Russia have so far been killed or injured. We join a mortar team on Ukraine's side of the border with Kursk. They say attacks in this direction are intensifying, even as Moscow and Pyongyang focus on pushing Ukrainian troops off Russian land. Fire, he shouts. The soldiers are aiming for targets inside Russia.
They just fired their mortars towards the Russian positions. We've been told there's a drone overhead, so we're having to get back to cover.
With Ukraine now pitched against two of the world's largest armies, it's a grueling fight.
The biggest danger? Mortars, shelling or FPV drones, and sometimes sabotage and reconnaissance groups.
The battle for Kursk could be about to become even harder, especially if the North Koreans learn lessons from their first clashes.
Right now, for about 2 weeks, there have been no North Koreans at all. Either they are analyzing their mistakes or tending to their wounds, or maybe they are waiting for reinforcements. There is talks that Kim Jong-un is sending more North Koreans here.
And what do you think?
I think they will return soon.
Deborah Haynes, Sky News, northeastern Ukraine.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News Monday morning. Will the government give the go-ahead on an expansion at Heathrow? We'll debate the pros and cons of a third runway. Next.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
You are not getting in this elevator, okay?
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Sakulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Free wherever you get your news. This is what they're up against. The wind is the really big problems. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well,
Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? This is the exact spot in Nottingham where their 19-year-old son, Barnaby Webber, lost his life.
I just think it's so cruel and so harsh.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
Sky News gets the full story first. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. It's legal to let go. Set the speed and take the hands off. It's almost driverless, but not quite. Hans is a highly trained police dog. The force is incredible. It's really frightening, actually. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has suggested the government would support an expansion of Heathrow Airport, despite opposition from the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, and the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. So, is it a good idea or not? Paul McGuinness, chair of No Third Runway Coalition, and Vicky Price, a chief economic advisor to the Centre for Economics and Business Research, are both with us this morning. Thank you for joining us. Paul, make your case.
Well, for a start, a very interesting announcement from Rachel Reeves, but it all seems a little bit performative to us, and Heathrow haven't even submitted an application yet. And it seems, if anything, actually, to us, that this is probably very bad news for Heathrow because it comes with the announcements of several other expansions. As expected, it would appear that Gatwick is going to get expansion, so too Luton. And if you combine that with the expansions already given the go-ahead at Stansted and London City, that equates to increasing the capacity of the South East by 60 million passengers a year, which is more than Heathrow expansion was ever going to offer. One even wonders that if these expansions had been in the pipeline a few years ago, whether Heathrow expansion would ever have been recommended at all. An infrastructure finance specialist who does some work with us believes that these announcements effectively mean that Heathrow expansion will be uninvestable. And in any case, it would be years away, whereas all of these expansions are ready to go and will be delivering before the planning application for Heathrow were to go through that process, even if it were to submit an application. And I think probably it's less likely that it will on the back of the other expansions which Rachel Reeves is announcing.
Pretty comprehensive. Vicky, your thoughts?
Well, yes, I mean, the work that has been done about the impact of expanding Heathrow suggested that it would be very good for economic growth and for job creation. And also, of course, it would link up quite a large part of the rest of the UK into Heathrow, which is, of course, a big hub. And it would enhance the sort of situation of the UK as a major place in which to do trade with and also to come and possibly invest, which is one of the main reasons for thinking about this now, because it would help growth. Of course, it's quite right, it would take quite some time. Growth will happen over a period of time. But it was always assumed that there would be more happening all around the UK anyway. So the Heathrow plans originally, as they were made, didn't suggest that there wouldn't be any expansion anywhere else. So it would complement what happens elsewhere. And the destinations from Heathrow are quite different, and its use as a hub is quite different to what you'd get in other parts of the UK. So I don't think that any of the suggestions that have been made about extending other airports have a bearing on whether you also go ahead with Heathrow. The Heathrow issue is much more a cost issue, how much it would be, how expensive and who is going to bear it. Because the plans right now are very comprehensive in terms of, getting rid of bits of the M25, having a big tunnel, who is going to bear that cost? It's going to be Heathrow itself, which of course it would not be the case if it's the infrastructure bit, but also the cost of the extension itself. And that needs somehow to be guaranteed, if you like, in terms of government policy. But I look at this much more as a way of indicating that actually the UK is serious about growth and that businesses are going to be supported in expansion in the UK. And if you don't have a major hub like Heathrow really able to cope with the increased demands that there will be, lots of other airports are expanding and building new runways as we speak, then that's going to be detrimental for the UK.
I think it's very interesting that we talk about the hub model. If anything, actually, the hub model is declining. I noticed that 81% of passengers into Heathrow last year had London as their final destination. And with a couple of exceptions around the world, the hub model is actually diminishing. There are more point-to-point flights. But I think Vicky has sort of absolutely hit it on the head, really. It comes down to the expense. And people talk about the third runway as if it's just some sort of addendum airstrip. The plans actually involve, tunnelling over the M25's busiest junction, erasing houses, destroying villages, in order to increase the size of Heathrow by an area which is larger than Birmingham International Airport, in order to fly as many extra flights as Gatwick. It actually equates to a proposal to build Britain's second largest airport right next to the first, which is the current Heathrow operation, which already statistically is the world's most disruptive airport. And that's because it is situated bang smack in the middle of the most densely packed residential region in the country. And that is why it has always been so difficult over 7 decades to expand. And it's why, on its own merits, it will fail again. The difference on this occasion, however, is that all these other expansions have added the capacity that Heathrow had offered and will be up and running before Heathrow have even got through planning.
Well, I think there are some good points made there, and we need to bear that in mind, that indeed the cost, as I suggested, is a very, very important part. But I think it is part of the bigger strategy of what do we do with the UK, in the sense of, are we going to be focusing on growth? Yes, lots of other airports can also expand, but the connectivity that you get at Heathrow is such an important one. I mean, you have, of course, the only one which is linked with an underground station or a tube, which takes you into the centre of London. It's really, really important. HS2 itself is going to help quite significantly. So it is a different category. Though, it? Yes, but it's a different category to the other airports, which can handle particular types of country-to-country trade. But this is, a real sign that you have, serious intention in terms of positioning the UK as a trade centre and investment centre across Europe, which other countries are now trying to get into themselves, and will probably achieve this unless we actually make a declaration and really move forward in this respect.
You said the hub model is declining, but I travelled through the Middle East recently, and yes, it's alive and well there.
The Middle East is utterly the exception. You're absolutely right to point that out, because it sits between continents. But other than in the Middle East, no, it is very much a declining model. If I may just come back on something which Vicky has said there, the Office of Budget Responsibility is an institution in which this government puts an enormous amount of store. The head of the OBR told the Treasury Select Committee in November that because Britain already has a high level of connectivity, any investment in airport expansion is unlikely actually to bring great returns. And if you go back even to the Treasury model, when they analysed the possibility of Heathrow expansion, it showed very, very negative gains and quite possibly even a loss of up to about £2 billion over 60 years if Heathrow were to expand.
Well, the work that was done, though, under the Howard Davis Commission back in 2015 showed quite the opposite, that actually there would be very substantial benefits coming out of Heathrow. So, yes, of course, the circumstances have changed up to a point because, lots of other countries have expanded in the period that we did nothing at all. So obviously it needs to be relooked, but there is no doubt that the initial estimates of positive results as having greater capacity at Heathrow are still there, and are still, and you've seen all businesses and all the trade associations being very much in favour, because they know from daily experience how important having an enhanced Heathrow would be for them.
Well, this is a layperson's question, but why can we not harness RAF Northolt? Of course, Heathrow used to be a military airbase, didn't it?
Yes, well, it's a very interesting question, but I would go even further. And in the country at the moment, there's quite a lot of unused capacity within our aviation sector. One of the things that has been recognised, again, by the Department for Transport, is that once we start increasing capacity down the southeast, we're likely to suck away more activity from the regions. In fact, even the document which supported Heathrow expansion identified that quite a large number of direct international flights would be brought down to Heathrow rather than staying within the regions. And this is also...
Which is why Andy Burnham proposed it.
Which is exactly why Anne Burnham
Which is why we need HS2, some might say.
Yes.
Well, we are...
Different argument, I know.
We're not on that one today. Either way, it is quite clear that all the analysis shows that an increased Heathrow in particular would mean less regional opportunity, less regional growth. And in all probability, we wish to have infrastructure of all sorts for the benefit of the economy around the entirety of the country, rather than just down in the overheated southeast.
Okay. Well, the truth is, of course, that everything complements each other, as I said earlier. So you can have different types of growth, if you would just think about that, in different parts of the UK that can have their own airport increase, which meets their own needs. I mean, Heathrow is different. It's an international, seriously international airport, which also, in many ways, sort of showcases what the UK is all about. And I think what Rachel Reeves is probably trying to show right now is that we are seriously in the business of competing. And Heathrow is very, very much part of what the UK needs to focus on if it is indeed to do so.
OK.
And yet it is all performative because no application has been submitted yet. And
has yet been submitted.
Has yet been submitted, and there's nothing the government can do about that.
Yeah, and British Airways, which is the flag carrier, doesn't want it. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. It's good to debate it with you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Very quick look at the weather, very much in the headlines again. There you go. Storm Hermione will bring further wind and rain over the next couple of days with a risk of disruption, but it won't be as windy as of late. Chilly in the north, prolonged rain and hill snow over eastern Scotland, milder if windier elsewhere with widespread blustery showers. That's the way the weather's looking here. Also focusing on Auschwitz today, the 80th anniversary, a special ceremony at 2 p.m. We'll cover that for you here on Sky News. And around 500,000 Palestinians returning to Gaza. Very, very busy news day. Do stay tuned. Our way here on Sky.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
And everybody, a very good morning. It's 9 o'clock. Coming up on today's programme for you. Israel allows Palestinians to return to northern Gaza in a deal that will see 6 hostages freed this week.
Plus, a warm and personable chat. Sir Keir Starmer becomes the first European leader to speak to Donald Trump since his inauguration.
And tens of thousands of people still without power in Northern Ireland as a second storm batters the UK.
And we'll be joined by the women of the British Army and the Royal Navy who've just finished the world's toughest row across the Atlantic.
It's Tuesday, the 27th of January. Israel allows nearly 500,000 Palestinians to return to northern Gaza for the first time in more than a year.
Issues that had threatened to derail the fragile ceasefire over the weekend have been resolved, and there will be 6 Israeli hostages released in the coming days.
The King will become the first British monarch to visit Auschwitz today, 80 years on from its liberation. Sir Keir and President Trump agreed to meet, setting the path for a state visit by the US President.
Another named storm is hitting the UK, bringing gale force winds, rain and snow. We'll have the very latest from Porthcawl here in South Wales.
Morning, everybody. We've been watching pictures all morning of Palestinians returning to northern Gaza for the first time in more than a year of war. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle joining us now from Jerusalem. Alistair, tell us what's happening this morning.
Yeah, extraordinary images of up to 500,000 Gazans returning north through the Netzarim corridor, through Wadi Gaza, to the north of the Gaza Strip, many of them returning home after months and months being forced to live in tented camps along the Mwasi humanitarian zone. A significant moment, I think a really significant moment in this war, but in this ceasefire process, because for the first time in such a long time, Gazans now have a degree of freedom to move around the Gaza Strip. The Israeli forces have withdrawn from the Netzarim corridor, a strategic point for them, so key for their war aims, but they have now withdrawn in accordance with the ceasefire agreement. So you're seeing these pictures here, live pictures from Wadi Gaza, as people are moving on foot, carrying what they can in that strip along the coastal part of central Gaza. Now, this has all come about after a delay because of a disagreement over the ceasefire. Israel said that Hamas should have released a female hostage called Arbel Yahud on Saturday. She wasn't released, and so Israel didn't withdraw its forces from this part of Gaza. But that has been resolved, so therefore you're seeing the pictures that we are seeing here this morning, but also as a result of that resolution, Arbel Yahud and 2 other hostages will be released in the coming days, and then there'll be a further hostage-prisoner exchange on Saturday as well.
For now, thanks very much indeed, Alistair. Thank you. Keir Starmer and Donald Trump having a buddy chat last night.
Indeed, a little bit of a bromance going on there. So, as you pointed out to Sam earlier in the programme, Donald Trump was talking about how Keir Starmer was doing a good job only a couple of days ago. And now the 2 leaders had this phone call yesterday where they spoke about trade, they spoke about foreign policy, but there were things that they didn't speak about, for instance, defence spending, tariffs, the kind of things that might be slightly more awkward perhaps. But nonetheless, what we did speak about. So, first of all, Trump offered his condolences to Keir Starmer for the death of his brother that happened over the Christmas period. Keir Starmer kind of congratulated Donald Trump for securing that ceasefire in the Middle East that you were just speaking to Ali Bunkle about. And then when we talk about trade, what was really interesting was the line in the Downing Street readout said how the PM had set out how we are deregulating to boost growth. Now, when it comes to deregulation as a policy, it's the kind of policy you expect from more right-wing governments. It's the kind of policy you would expect from Donald Trump himself. So clearly, Downing Street is trying to kind of reach out to Trump and show that there is some common ground there, despite the fact that they're from very different sides of the political spectrum. But what's really interesting is the fact that it's not the kind of rhetoric you'd hear from a left-wing or a Labour government. And it's something that might perhaps set a little bit of nervousness around some of the left-wing Labour MPs, for instance, when it comes to deregulation and whether we want to deregulate so much. People are always very worried, especially on the left, about deregulation and whether that means kind of having a bit of a free-for-all that potentially disadvantages consumers or those at the other receiving end, as it were, of some of those deregulation policies. But interestingly also, there's a couple of pieces of, let's say, nervousness that's still realistically bubbling under the surface. Questions around, as we said, tariffs. We still don't know what Donald Trump is going to do. He's talking about tariffs on Colombia now. Will he potentially impose tariffs on the UK? We still don't know. Second of all, will he accept Keir Starmer's choice of ambassador to the UK, to the US, Peter Mandelson? We still don't know that either. Now, at the end of the readout, it said that they agreed to meet at some point. So the real question now is, how soon will that be? Will Trump's first visit perhaps be to the UK, for instance? And therefore, when will they meet and where will they meet?
OK, we'll see. For now, thanks so much. Thank you. Well, after a weekend of chaos that saw 2 people killed, a hospital lose power, and travel disrupted right across the country, another named storm is bringing more wild winds. Dan standing by for us in Porthcawl. What's it like there, Dan? Morning.
Morning, Kay. Yeah, pretty blustery. What's happening at the minute is Storm Iowyn, which caused all that destruction that you mentioned about and that led to the deaths of 2 young men last week. That's now moved on, but the after effects are still being felt. I mean, look at Ireland. There's still more than 250,000 homes without power. Northern Ireland, some 65,000 homes without power. We've had homes without power down in Devon and Cornwall, several thousand over the weekend. So the effects of Iowyn are still being felt. What we're dealing with this morning are fresh weather warnings, 2 yellow weather warnings for wind and rain, affecting most of Wales and most of southern and eastern England. And they're in place right through until 6 o'clock tomorrow morning for the wind. So we're seeing gusts of up to 70 miles an hour here in South Wales, where we are at the moment, and that is causing lots of disruption. So there's still plenty of people without power, and that's also bringing in flood alerts and warnings as well. We've got 15 flood alerts in Wales, 173 flood alerts in England where flooding is possible, and then there's flooding likely in 51 areas of England as well. So that's something to keep an eye on. Of course, that this disruption will cause havoc on the railways. There may be flight cancellations because the breezes are really coming in. As I say, gusts of 70 miles an hour. This bad weather is set to continue really right through until Wednesday. Then we're going to see things calm down. But the weather warnings in place across really Wales and the southern half of England, they're going to stay in place right through until Tuesday. Expect wet and windy weather right through until Wednesday.
OK, for now, thank you. What's happening in Northern Ireland, Rachel? They've got some power back, but plenty haven't?
Yeah, exactly. We're keeping a close eye still on the clean-up operation in Northern Ireland and in Scotland as well after the effects of Storm Eowyn, which I think was one of the strongest storms to have hit the UK, it's thought, in the past 10 years. Northern Ireland Electricity have put out an alert in the last 20 minutes or so, half an hour maybe, saying approximately 65,000 customers still remain without electricity across Northern Ireland, which is a huge number of people, considering that storm hit at the start of the weekend. They say power has, though, been restored to around 220,000 properties, and they're urging people to get in touch with them to report any issues and also to make sure they stay clear of any dangerous locations. Obviously, a huge number of this is down to the fact that trees came down, taking out power lines, and it's been a huge operation over the past couple of days to try to restore power to as many homes and businesses as possible. But clearly, some 65,000 customers still without power this morning. Similarly, in Scotland, similar operations, certainly around trying to get the train lines back up and running. We've had alerts this morning from Network Rail Scotland saying still significant damage, still a huge amount of debris on the tracks to be repaired. A number of routes there also not able to reopen today. They include lines around Paisley, for example. So again, people just being urged to stay safe and check before you travel.
And this latest storm with us till Wednesday?
Till us till Wednesday. I think that's when we'll sort of see the after effects. I think really the weather warnings should end by tomorrow, but we'll still continue to see the odd shower and a bit of gusty weather until Wednesday. This is Storm Armenia. Now, it's been named by Spanish meteorologists because it's hit Spain and bits of France as well, so much worse than here. But we are seeing this low pressure system, which has come up from where Dan, of course, is reporting from this morning in the southwest. So areas like Cornwall really badly affected, huge gusts of around 80-mile-an-hour winds. Storm Eowyn came with around 100-mile-an-hour winds, so this isn't quite as bad, but of course it's still pretty awful if you're there stood on the coast as he is. And we've also seen huge numbers of weather warnings, flood alerts as well across large parts of the UK, mainly though south of England, east of England and huge parts of Wales as well. And that's going to continue through today and into tomorrow.
OK, for now, thank you. Thanks so much. Rest of today's top stories for you.
Yes, good morning. Some of the day's other headlines. We're going to start with the DRC because Rwandan-backed rebels have captured the city of Goma in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Congolese government says it amounts to a declaration of war. The UN has described mass panic among the 2 million people living there. Swedish authorities have seized a ship suspected of sabotaging an underwater cable in the Baltic Sea. NATO's begun patrols in recent weeks to stop repeated attacks on underwater power and telecoms cables, some of which have been blamed on Russia, which Russia denies. The government is to introduce a deposit return scheme for plastic bottles and cans. They hope it will increase the amount of containers which are recycled to around 90%.
The King will become the first British monarch to visit Auschwitz today, 80 years on from its liberation. 6 were systematically murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. Our Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins joining us now from Auschwitz. The King will be there later on today for a special ceremony, but the events of the day have already begun, I believe.
Yes, that's right. That ceremony that the King will attend will actually take place here at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and there we will hear from survivors who have made the trip to remember the past and also push forward those warnings into the present. But as you say, the events of today have already begun. A very moving event happening at the main camp where around 50 survivors put down candles and flowers at the death wall where many people were shot in Auschwitz, remembering those who lost their lives. Now, only 50 survivors have managed to make this trip this year. Many are getting into old age, and one of those who couldn't come was Simon. He actually managed to escape from the train on the way to Auschwitz. This is his story.
Simon wasn't meant to survive. As a child, Nazis sent him to die. He remembers the day evil came to his door and took him, his mother and sister away.
The doorbell rang and all 3 of us froze. The front door opened and 2 men entered shouting, "Gestapo, papers." My mother got up, as white as a sheet, and handed over her ID card, her passport. The Nazi took a look at it and appeared satisfied. Yes, this is the Granovsky family. You have been denounced.
Simon was just 11 when he was arrested with his mother Shanna and sister Ita in Belgium. Their crime, being Jewish. Their punishment, execution at Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland. They'd been packed with more than 1,000 others on a Nazi death train heading towards this hell, when a resistance attack gave Simon a chance to escape.
I jumped from the train and I heard the soldiers running in my direction, firing gunshots and shouting. I jumped from the train because I obeyed my mother. If she had told me to stay with her, then I'd never have left her side. And I would have died with her in the gas chamber.
In the chaos, Simon says he fled into the woods and kept running until a local family gave him refuge. 3 days later, his mother was dead. She and Simon's sister were among more than 1 million people murdered at Auschwitz. Practiced and precise extermination, many starved, shot, gassed, or worked to death.
All over the world, Auschwitz has become a symbol of terror, genocide, and the Holocaust, the darkest acts of humanity that should never be repeated.
As survivors prepare to return here for the 80th anniversary of the camp's liberation,
Simon's making his own pilgrimage to Auschwitz, to the place he calls the factory of death, where his sister and mother now rest. A place where he tells young people about the crimes of the past to prevent a repeat in the present.
I want to inform the young people of the barbarity of yesterday for defend our democracy of today.
Simon, a witness to the greatest crime in history, issuing a warning in divided times. Auschwitz is a lasting reminder of humanity at its most inhumane. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Auschwitz.
Someone else who will also attend the event is the Chief Rabbi of the Commonwealth, Sir Ephraim Novis, and he joins us now from Poland. Hello to you. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. What does it mean to you to be there today?
Good morning, Kay. The mood here is very somber. I'm in Krakow right now. In a few hours' time, I will make my way over to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And there is only one subject on everybody's minds. And also the fact that this is the 80th anniversary. You know, I was here 20 years ago. I accompanied Prince Edward then, and there were many, many hundreds of survivors. 10 years ago, there were 300. And today it's expected that there will be between 40 and 50 survivors, including Marla Tripic, who has come with us from the UK, representing the survivors of the UK. And it is so wonderful and moving that His Majesty the King will be representing the UK and the Commonwealth this afternoon.
How important is it that Auschwitz survivors, albeit in dwindling numbers, and state delegations head to Auschwitz today?
It's incredibly important that we all recognize what transpired here. And this, of course, is the 80th anniversary of the liberation. And we recall that dreadful time in our history when some 6 million Jewish women, men, and children were murdered in an exercise of industrialized killing, together with many millions of others. And really, the phrase that everybody is using is never again. And my hope is that with all the promises and all the undertakings being made by world leaders here today, that actually it will be translated into action, because never again shouldn't just be a slogan that is whispered in sadness. It needs to be a pledge that is proclaimed with bravery and with strength in order to guarantee that genuinely this will never happen again.
And we can learn from Auschwitz what hatred does.
Oh, absolutely. The lessons of Auschwitz can be internalized by all of us and are so critically important for all of our societies today. Absolutely.
You've also called, I believe, Chief Rabbi, on decent people to reject hatred wherever it comes from. I was leading into that, I suppose. Are sites like Auschwitz and days like today, how important are they in giving people those reminders?
Well, you see, whenever I've been to Auschwitz, I've never failed just to be so moved and so saddened. I force myself to go out of respect to the victims who were killed there so brutally. And this site, together with many other sites, sadly, you know that there were 44,000 concentration camps and ghettos. It's a dazzling number. The extent of the murder, the scale of this awful set of deeds, and coming to a place such as this is an experience that one will never forget. I'm so pleased that Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer and his wife visited Auschwitz 10 days ago. And certainly the fact that His Majesty the King is coming sends a very strong message to all of our society in the UK. We care about what happened to the Jews. We empathize, we have solidarity with those victims. But more important than anything else, we have to guarantee that we will learn the lessons from what transpired then.
When you walk into Auschwitz, what are the overwhelming emotions that you feel?
Well, You know, you see piles of shoes, thousands and thousands of them, of suitcases, of items of cutlery. You hear from the guides of the terrible deeds that were carried out on the very soil where one is standing. You visit the crematoria, what's left of them, and our minds just cannot fully appreciate and imagine the depth of cruelty and the enormity of suffering. And as far as those Jews who suffered there are concerned, it happened for one single crime, and that is just the fact that they are Jewish. So the lessons are so critically important now, particularly at a time when, sadly, anti-Semitism right around the world is on the increase.
Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to join us. I hope you have strength during the day today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News as the world marks 80 years since the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp, joined by a Holocaust survivor at 9:30.
When you cover big, tense protests, there's almost always a moment when the atmosphere changes. There's a different noise, and you start to smell tear gas in the air.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
When we spoke to the fishermen down in Cornwall, all the politics from Westminster was a million miles away. This was about their jobs, their livelihoods.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Now, Parkinson's disease is the fastest growing neurological condition in the world, affecting around 8.5 million people. In February, the charity Cure Parkinson's are hosting an art exhibition in London to raise awareness and funds for research into the disease. Joining us now is Alison Anderson, who was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's in 2015 and director for Artwise Creators, and that's Laura Culpen. Ladies, it's good to see you both. Thank you for taking the time. I wonder, Alison, first of all, if you can tell me about the fact that you were diagnosed with Parkinson's 2015, early onset. You were only 46?
46, yeah.
Tell me, what happened?
I'd had symptoms for probably about 3 years, but lots of disparate symptoms. They didn't seem to be related, so I didn't realise what was going on until probably about 3 years down the line. Went to see my GP. She knew immediately there was something not right, and I realised at that time that there was, a significant neurological problem. And I was referred to a neurologist who within 10 minutes had diagnosed me with Parkinson's, which absolutely just, it was like a bombshell.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
What symptoms did you have?
I had tremor in my right side. It predominantly affects my right side. I couldn't write. I lost the ability to write. Things like moving the computer mouse or typing on a keyboard. I started to get really slow and stiff in my movements. And my memory and concentration were affected. But then I was a middle-aged menopausal woman, so, lots of the symptoms, I put them down to the menopause, but actually it was Parkinson's.
And that was 10 years ago?
That was 10 years ago, yes.
And how have you coped since?
I think the initial couple of years I found incredibly hard, just adjusting psychologically to knowing that you'd got a progressive degenerative disorder for which there's currently no cure. So, I found that really difficult, but I started exercising. Exercise is really good for people with Parkinson's. It's been shown to slow down disease progression. So I started to exercise. I got on my bike and started cycling. I've kept cycling since, and I keep really busy, really active, and that does me a lot of good. That helps me cope.
And you don't need to worry about stability on your bike?
I do at times, yes. Yeah, it's not easy. It's certainly a lot harder than it was 10 years ago, but I still manage.
That's great, that's great. Laura, tell me about Artwise.
Yeah, so Artwise curators, we're really, really proud of this project that we're doing to help cure Parkinson's, and hearing Alison speak just makes it all the more worthwhile. We established this project called Cure Cubed for the charity Cure Parkinson's in 2017, and we've commissioned over 300 artists and raised almost £2 million that's gone towards curative research. So we're coming up to our 5th edition of the project, which will be in Bonhams. And the concept is really simple, really. We give the artists a brief, a space to work with, and it's a 20 centimetre panel or a 20 centimetre perspex box. So it's this size. And it's like a blank canvas or a blank space for the artist to do whatever they want with. And we've had some just amazing contributions and generosity from the artists. And the exhibition is shown in Bonhams. It starts on Saturday and it's shown for 5 days. And all the works are shown online and sold online to raise money for Cure Parkinson's.
We're just looking at some of the pieces of artwork as we're chatting to you. It's amazing, isn't it? How advanced are we to find a cure for Parkinson's?
I think we're making progress all the time. I think the understanding is far better than it was even 10 years ago when I was diagnosed. There's still a lot of research to be done. It's a complex condition.
Do we know why some people like you early onset and others not?
We don't know. We think there's things that contribute to Parkinson's, but we don't know, and there's no one known cause. There's no, obviously, cure at the moment. But like I say, I think the understanding, we're learning all the time with the research that's been done. And Cure Parkinson's every year is investing more and more in, groundbreaking research into treatments that have the potential to slow, stop or reverse the condition.
Amazing. And Lauren, how do people find out more about the exhibition?
It's online on www.cure3.co.uk, all the information, all the artworks, and you can click on and you can actually see the artworks in the round.
Right, 3 as in the number?
3 as in the number.
Okay. Cure
yes.
3?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, hopefully you'll raise an awful lot of money again this time around. It's good to see you, ladies.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
See, I wasn't that scary after all, was I? It's good to see you. Thank you, ladies. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News, joined live by someone who lived through the horrors of Nazi occupation. That's come. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Returning now to the 80-year anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Events are being held in Poland to mark the event, with the King amongst those expected to attend. Joining us now is Holocaust survivor Manfred Goldberg and Ed Lewin from the Holocaust Educational Trust. Hello to you both. Manfred, I'm going to just speak a bit louder so you can hear my questions,
yes,
if that's
thank you.
OK.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Tell me your story.
I was born in 1930 in a town in Germany to parents, both of whom were born in Poland, made their way into Germany, met there and married and lived in Germany. Born in 1930, I had a younger brother, 4 years younger than I. I was only 3 years old when the Nazis gained power. I was too young to understand the consequences, but in retrospect, I know that they began passing a stream of anti-Jewish laws, curtailing life for Jews, confiscating things, pressurizing Jews, limiting their civil rights, eventually withdrawing them completely. Life went on getting worse and worse for Jews. But one thing was so radically different to today that I feel I ought to mention it. Today, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of refugees roam the world. Many of them economic refugees who are not in fear of their lives, and they're given refuge in many different countries. Back in the 1930s, it was very different. Many countries had tightly shut borders, and the few that had sort of more mercifully visa quotas made it very difficult to qualify for one of these life-saving visas. As a result, although Jews were desperate to leave Germany, it was extraordinarily difficult to do so. And eventually, when I was 11 years old, my little brother was 7, we were arrested and sent to our first camp. I was 11, my little brother was 7. All adults had to slave labor 7 days a week. I was in charge of looking after my little brother because the adults had to go out to work. We stayed in that first camp for a year. In the second camp, they had a different policy that youngsters or people who are too old to work or too weak to work lost their right to live. As a result, my little brother, who was now 9 years old, was taken away to be murdered. The Nazis had no use for non-productive Jews. I, at age 13, was selected as, from their point of view, a potentially profitable slave laborer, and I had to go out to work every day. But my little brother, he survived for a couple of weeks in the camp, but then coming home from work one evening, he and other young children had gone. They had been picked up by some SS officers during the day, and we have absolutely not a word about their fate, but knowing what we do know, that the Nazis had no use for non-productive Jews, it's a certainty that those children lost their lives the day they were taken. I was sent on to 3 other camps where we had to slave labor, and again, once people became too weak to work, they would be taken to execution sites where they would be shot and their bodies thrown into a mass grave to be replaced by other Jews who still had a little more strength for them to exploit. We were on a starvation diet from the day we arrived until the day of our liberation. In my case, 3.5 years later. Just a week or so, 2 weeks before the end of the war, we were in a brutal concentration camp called Stutthof, which had a high-voltage electric fence surrounding it, as well as watchtowers manned by armed guards. It had reached a stage where some inmates were just skin and bone, and they felt they couldn't take any more suffering. And they began, ever so slowly, some of them shuffling on their knees because they no longer had strength to walk towards the electric fence to electrocute themselves to end their suffering. People died every night lying in our bunk beds, which we had to share to a narrow bunk bed. One morning, we had long lost our names. Each one was known by a number. My number was 56478. Unlike Auschwitz, it was not tattooed. We had to remember it because we had to shout it out every morning. And if you got confused and shouted out the wrong number or you couldn't remember it, there was usually a punishment, a couple of lashes from a whip. So it's deeply engraved in my mind for the rest of my life. Numbers were called out. My number was called. I had to step forward. We were sent out, 2,000 of us, on a death march. My late mother was in the same camp, but she was separate from me in a women's camp, separated from the men's by barbed wire fences. As we left the camp under armed guard, we saw a similar column emerging from the women's camp. Eventually, the two columns merged into one long column. And of course, uppermost in my mind was the thought, is my mother marching or is she left behind? And likewise, she didn't know where I would be. We sort of began wending our way through the long column, and eventually we found each other. We were overjoyed, although we had no idea what lay ahead. At least we would share the same fate. We spent 7 days on what was called the death march, except in our case, because it was so close to the end of the war that the roads several kilometers down the road were already blocked by Allied forces. So they tried to take us deeper into Germany by packing us into large barges and towing us to sea. We had no idea where we were. I can tell you now in retrospect that it was the Baltic Sea. And after some days at sea, our guards disappeared, left us unguarded. And remarkably, some inmates of our barge realized that we were not far from shore. They managed to, by loosening floorboards from the barge, they arranged themselves as a rowing team around this barge containing almost 1,000 souls, packed like sardines. They managed to row the boat ashore. We ran aground and we jumped off. It was the middle of the night. It took about 15 hours to cover 500 meters. And as we jumped off, some people were so debilitated, their minds no longer functioned, and they just sat there not attempting to jump off. Remarkably, quite unexpectedly, the SS returned at that moment. Half of them mounted the barge and shot everyone still on the barge. The other half came ashore and rounded us up, and we thought our last moment had come. But no, they formed us into a large, long column and made us march again. Daylight began, and anyone throughout our death march who didn't have the strength to keep up to speed and began trailing the marching column was shot by the guards mercilessly. We had been marching for some time when quite suddenly our guards stopped shooting, killing people whose bodies were just left where they fell. Suddenly they turned and ran away from us. And there was jubilation among us. We're free, no guards. And they had realized that the tank column, which was rolling towards us, was a British tank column. And that was our moment of liberation. They were followed by truckloads of British soldiers who stopped, began caring for us. For 6 days, we'd had not a drop of water nor a bite to eat. They had truckloads of food, which they began handing out to us. They allowed us to rest. And that was our wonderful moment of freedom, which to this moment I'm grateful for. And I have attempted to sort of condense 3.5 years in the camps into these few minutes you have given me.
That with us, Manfred, and the level of suffering.
That is sort of
to imagine.
a very
Tell me,
brief summary.
thank you, Manfred. Thank you. Tell me about your work.
Thank you. I mean, the Holocaust Educational Trust seeks to educate people from all over the country, every background, about the Holocaust, what happened during the Holocaust, remarkable stories of tragedy, ultimately of hope, like Manfred's, and the lessons that can be drawn from that today. And sadly, our work is more important than ever. Anti-Semitism continues to rise. Young people, every person in the country is subject to misinformation and disinformation on our social media platforms about the Holocaust, distortion of conspiracy theories, reduction in the apparent numbers of Jews that were murdered, the 6 million Jews that were murdered during the Holocaust, and increasingly the denial or absence of the specificity of the Jews in the Holocaust. The annihilation of the Jewish people across Europe was central to Nazi ideology, and any absence of that or removal of that is a distortion of the truth. And it is the truth that today we seek through survivors like Manfred and other tools that we want to ensure is well recognised by the country. And today it's the 80th anniversary, of course, of the liberation of Auschwitz, the start of a very important year for Holocaust commemoration and education. It's also significant because we know this is one of the last key anniversaries with significant numbers of survivors with us. So it's so important that we take this moment and instill in the nation's conscience the truth around what happened.
It's almost impossible to believe that you have to do that, but there we are. Manfred, may I just ask what happened to your mother?
Yes. If I may just digress for a moment, my father was arrested by the Nazis before the war and deported to Poland, where he had been born. Although he had lived in Germany an unblemished life for more than 20 years, they decided to deport him to Poland. The Poles refused to accept him, and they were then sending him to a concentration camp, by the Poles sending him back to Germany. Quite miraculously, after many, many refusals, I told you how difficult it was to get a visa. My mother struck lucky, and from an English gentleman who she called an angel, when she had told him her heartbreaking story, he issued a visa just for my father, because he was in immediate danger of being sent to the camps. And my father managed to leave 10 days before the war began and reached the UK. My mother and us two children were finally deported to our first camp, which was in Riga in Latvia. And as I told you, I was in 5 different camps until we were mercifully liberated. And as a result, my father, when we made contact post-war, applied for my mother, who survived. But she survived despite being selected. You know, there were selections when you faced SS officers who said, live, die. I was permitted to live because I was young and strong. My mother was sent to those selected to die. She managed, quite remarkably with a few other people, to race across and join our survivor group. The guards began searching for people to drag them back to the condemned side, and they missed my mother. They didn't recognize her, so she saved her life that day and remained alive. We were liberated together. Post-war, my father applied for permission for us to join him in the UK, and I have been truly grateful to this country. When I reached here back in 1946, I thought I was privileged to live in paradise, truly. And I've been grateful ever since for being permitted to live my life in complete freedom. Coming to Great Britain was the first taste of normality, of normal life I had experienced. I was 16 by then, having missed 7 years of schooling and not speaking English. So it was a tough start, but thank God I've had a good life. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, who are all consider a revenge on the Nazis' attempt at wiping out every Jew they could lay their hands on.
And you're 95 years young now, aren't you?
Close to 95. Yeah. I'm 94 3/4.
May I shake your hand? Thank you so much.
Not at all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you. Thank you. Of course, we will have extensive coverage of the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz from 2 p.m. for a special programme here on Sky News. Do stay tuned our way.
When you cover big, tense protests, there's almost always a moment when the atmosphere changes. There's a different noise, and you start to smell tear gas in the air.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
When we spoke to the fishermen down in Cornwall, all the politics from Westminster was a million miles away. This was about their jobs, their livelihoods.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away? Sky News, the full story first.
You want to talk business? Meet me in the On Board Lounge. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Hello again, everybody. The first ever all-female British Army and Royal Navy teams have crossed the finish line of the world's toughest row, a 3,000-mile race across the Atlantic. Joining us now are members of both crews, Izzy, Nicola, Imi and Becca. Hello to you, ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning. Answering whatever order you like. What was it like?
Well, yes, so 46 days, we both did it in 46 days, 46 days of just 100% effort from everybody, unrelenting, facing all the elements day in, day out. An amazing experience, and I don't think any of us would swap for anything, but really taught us about ourselves. And how far we can push our bodies, and how wild it is out there. So yeah, absolutely incredible challenge, but I think we're all very glad to be back on dry land now.
Incredibly gruelling. What does it actually take to take part in a race like this?
I think you have to be a little bit insane, to be honest with you, to say that that you willingly put yourself through it. It's more of wanting to find out more about yourself and more about your teammates than anything else, and seeing whether or not you've got the mental fortitude and the toughness to see it through. And we're all just chatting, obviously, before talking to you, and we did say that everybody's learned at least something about themselves that they didn't know they had in them, or about somebody else. So it's quite heartwarming, I think, most of the time.
How do you prepare for something like this?
Oh, I don't think you can really, but we did loads of hours on the water before we came out, and then just coming together as a four and learning about each other, I think, is key. To get through all of the different struggles that we had out there was actually about the four of us as a team and the four of you guys as a team, and even actually the eight of us, like leaning on each other and just sometimes being like, this is awful, or are you okay? Giving somebody that extra chocolate bar or whatever. It's all about you as a team coming together to help each other out.
Now, both teams are doing this, ladies, to raise money for separate charities. Can you tell me about them?
Yeah, so from a Navy perspective, we're raising money for the Royal Navy Royal Marines Charity, which is an amazing organisation which looks after serving personnel and their families, everything from welfare, support, you name it, they will help you. And we're also raising money for Young Women's Trust, which is a really great organisation, again, which supports young women through anything to do with their careers. So we'll help them with their CVs, job opportunities, basically offers them career coaching and encourages young women into sort of fulfilling employment.
And Becca, you're doing, what's the Army one?
Sorry, yeah, so the Army, we're raising money for the Girls Network, which is an incredible charity based in the UK, a mentoring charity, again, for young girls. So pairing young girls with mentors across all areas of industry who potentially haven't seen or had as many exposure to as many opportunities. And it's, again, broadening their horizons, giving them the support, the guidance, that mentorship to reach their maximum potential. And one of the things we've really learned from ourselves and on this road is actually how much power a community has and how much having a community around you can build you up to allow you to achieve anything. And that's really what the Girls Network is all about as well, having that community behind you to allow you to achieve far greater.
I love that sign behind you, lady, that says, "We rode the Atlantic." Good for you. Congratulations. Well done. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Amazing. That's impressive, isn't it?
I couldn't do it. Stating the obvious, I
couldn't run across the Thames.
I was going to say, I don't think I could do 10 minutes on a rowing machine.
I was about to say.
So inspiring. Yeah, brilliant.
What's we doing our 6 weeks off from the army? I don't know. Let's go and row the Atlantic, shall we?
Why have you got all these papers marked up?
Because, depending on which story you chose, Kate, I wanted to be ready for anything.
I like this story better.
OK, fabulous.
Tell
This
me.
is a fun story about a couple who wanted to go from Cornwall to Crewe to collect their car, and it was way cheaper to fly to Spain and back than to just get a train. How mad is that?
And also stay in a hotel as well overnight, too.
I know, and a day out in Spain.
Train would have cost 400 quid.
Yep.
If they'd gone from southern Cornwall up to... And the flights, including, as you said, a holiday as well, and it was £108.
Yeah, way cheaper.
They got 8 hours in the sun. They said a bit of beer, hopefully a bit of tapas. But, I mean, it's so depressing, isn't it? Because it can be so hard to try to travel in a way that is economical, but also in a way that's sort of good for the climate. And yet they found themselves flying to Spain and back, but it was so much cheaper. I mean, it's just absolutely staggering, really.
And a shout-out for Manfred.
Shout out from Manfred, just absolutely remarkable, absolutely remarkable. I was watching some of his previous stuff as well, where he's paying tribute to his brother.
Yes.
You know, stories we must keep hearing as much as we can.
Exactly, and that was, I mean, it went on for a long time, and I could have talked to him for another hour or so. He was unbelievable. It is the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz today, and the King has decided for the first time that a monarch should attend. His brother did go in his capacity previously, but it's the first time a British monarch has been to Auschwitz. He'll be taking part in that event, and it's live here on Sky. Stay tuned.
I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse